Do we have a no? 1, 2, 3. Okay, great. Good evening. Welcome to the June 26th Planning Commission meeting. I think, hey Jackie, how are you? Good to see you. Do you want to do roll call?
Yes. Commissioner Miranda.
Here.
Commissioner Berube.
Here.
Commissioner Monlett.
Here.
Commissioner Nemerov.
Here.
Commissioner Bennett.
Here.
Commissioner Lee.
Here.
Commissioner Douglas.
Here.
Chair Olson.
Here. Thank you. So next is the approval of the meeting agenda. Does anyone have any changes that they would like to make to the agenda? No? So is there a motion to approve the agenda?
I move to approve the agenda.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second. All in favor? Aye. Motion carries. Next is the approval of the meeting minutes from the Planning Commission June 12th meeting. Were there any edits to that? To those? No, hearing none. Is there a motion? I look at you, Sheila.
I move to approve the minutes.
Is there a second? Second. Way to go. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. So we have 3 public hearings. Maybe before we get to that, Carrie, could we do maybe a quick introduction? Is that okay to? We've got a new member, I know.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. We have a new planning commissioner, Truss Douglas. Welcome to the planning commission. Maybe take just a second to introduce yourself and a little background, maybe.
My name is Truss Douglas. I've lived in the community for about 5 years, and I am excited to join the Planning Commission and help contribute to the city. So, thank you for having me.
Yeah, welcome. Thank you. Okay, Chris. So this is a public hearing. It's a variance request for 4213 and 4215 West 50th Street.
Chair, members of the Planning Commission, this is a variance request for 4213, 4215 West 50th Street. The subject property is located south of West 50th Street. It consists of a double dwelling unit, a side-by-side double, and a detached 2-car garage that loads from 50th Street. The garage shares a driveway with the property directly to the east, which is also a double. And that property also has a 2-car garage. So they do share this driveway that does load off of West 50th Street. And then to the west of the subject property is J Place, which is a street. It's classified as a street. It's very narrow. It functions more as an alleyway. There are no homes that are actually fronting J Place. There are the backs of some residential properties that have garages that come off of J Place, but they actually front Arden Avenue. So there aren't any homes fronting J Place, and to the east is the parking lot for Mercy Commons Church. J Place then terminates into a very small cul-de-sac, which again, there are some detached garages that load off of J Place. Here's a little more detailed aerial of the property. What you'll notice is that Mercy Commons has their parking lot to the west of the back of the church, and part of that parking lot has been paved into an alley right-of-way, and it's also striped for parking. That is not to say that it is a permanent situation. It is still controlled by the city, and the city can have them remove those parking stalls. It's just there hasn't been any need for the city really to use that area. It's not going to be improved. But if there is a situation where the city engineer feels that they would need to use the alleyway or request that the church remove some parking stalls, the city does have the ability to do that. This shows that platted alleyway, showing that Mercy Commons has their parking lot. It's functioned just fine. There hasn't been any issues with that. It does, however, impact the request this access to the alleyway does impact the request that the property owner has before you this evening. The property owner would like, this is a survey of the existing conditions, so you can see where that detached garage is. And this is one lot. It has not been subdivided into two separate lots. They can do a lot division in the future, which is a simple lot division to separate the two units so that they can be sold off individually. What is rather awkward, however, is that there is a two-car garage that could, I guess, service both units, but it's all on the east side. This is a survey of what the property owner would like to accomplish. The property owner, their desire is to move into the westerly unit. They are proposing to add on to the back of this unit, which will be their home. That addition meets all of the ordinance requirements. The other part of the project is they would like to remove that detached two-car garage and replace it with two single-stall garages and two carports. Now, the single-stall garages would service each individual unit so that the single-stall garage for the easterly unit would load off of that alleyway, which is currently functioning as part of Mercy Commons parking lot, as well as a carport. And then also the same for the westerly unit. However, that would load off of J Place for the detached single-stall garage and the carport. The variance that they're requesting in order to accomplish this is the setback requirement from a street along a side street. The minimum setback is 20 feet for garage opening. They are less than that, so they are asking for a 10.3-foot setback variance. What you'll notice, however, if you drove down J Place, there are plenty of detached garages that are even much closer loading off of J Place. And that's very similar to if you had detached garages loading off of an alley. However, J Place is considered a street. The other variance that they're requesting is from the minimum two-car garage per unit requirement. Currently, the property is in non-compliance because they have a two-car garage. They should have two-car garages or a four-car garage to service both units. This non-conforming situation actually is improving. They're not going to be providing 4 enclosed stalls, but they would be providing 2 one-car garages and then also 2 carports. So they would be adding to the ability to have some covered parking. They won't be eliminating what is currently out there now in terms of having a 2-car garage. They will have 2 single-car garages. So this then shows you the westerly elevation and the south elevation of the project, which impact in terms of the variance request. You see the detached single-stall garage and the carport along the westerly elevation, which is along J Place. And then along the south, again, a carport with the detached garage loading off of the alleyway. And the easterly elevation and north elevation, which really remain pretty much unchanged. And then some views from a number of directions showing those carports and also the detached single-stall garage. And again, some more views. If you drove by the front of the house, they've already improved the front of the home with some of these features. The intention now is to go forward with the rest of the plan, and then once complete, the property owners would like to move into their unit, and then in the future, they would like to subdivide the lot, which they can do for a double dwelling unit, and then presumably at some point, the 2 lots or the 2 units could be sold separately. This shows the floor plan of what they're proposing. And there was also in your packet some email exchange between the city engineer and a representative from Mercy Commons. They have no objection to removing some of the pavement markings to allow access for the garage and the carport. They also indicated they would do the same for the property owner to the east if they decide to do that. The city engineer has indicated that it's if they can get access away from 50th Street, that would be the most desirable opportunity for them. So Chad Milner has indicated that he does support the opportunity for doing the access for Mercy Common, from Mercy Commons parking lot. With that, the variance request is it reasonable, and it does, the applicant show that the land cannot be put to any reasonable use. This is a challenging site given it is a double dwelling unit. There's right-of-way to the north and to the west. In order to accomplish what they would like to do, variances are necessary unless they keep the access off of 50th, which is undesirable according to the city engineer. The requested setback along J Place actually is not anything that's out of the ordinary. If you go down J Place, there are a number of detached garages that are just as close. Granting the variance for the enclosed parking and setback variance to the west lot line will not alter the essential character of the neighborhood. Right now, they're maintaining that nonconformity. They will have 2 enclosed garage stalls. That's what they have currently. In this situation that they're proposing, they would be able to service each unit individually and then take that access off of 50th. Staff is supportive of the request and would recommend approval subject to the survey and plans reflected in the plans presented, and then compliance with any conditions listed in the engineer's memo. And with that, I will stop and answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Chris. Are there questions for Chris? Shirley?
Thanks, Chris. Does the city have any requirements or guidelines for garage access? Is there anything that says that driveway access should be off public streets? Anything like that?
Not specifically that I know of. I mean, you could have a private easement for a driveway. You can have a shared driveway with a private easement. I mean, it ultimately has to access either a street or an alley. This is a preferred solution by the city engineer. If they can get some of that access off of 50th and it's city right-of-way, that's a preferable solution.
Okay, so this is, the access for that second garage then is now going to be across private property? Is that
No.
private? It's not private property?
That's city property. It's city right-of-way. The one to the alleyway to the south.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that Mercy Commons has been using it as their parking lot, and there hasn't been any issue with that in the past.
And so the city doesn't see any issue with in the future, more so than getting an agreement from Mercy. Does the city see any drawback to having to maintain that in perpetuity for access to that garage?
It has not been a concern of the city engineer. That's was one of the first questions when the application came in is how can this function?
Sure.
And it's been reviewed by the city engineer, and it's, in his opinion, a preferable solution, getting it off of 50th, any access off of 50th that they can.
Okay. I guess in the worst case scenario, it still has that access. Obviously, the garage would be facing the wrong way, but to get to that garage, it would be a modification. You could still go back to accessing it as it is now, although it would merit some landscaping changes in the future. But there, in other words, there is a way to get to that garage.
There would be.
If they
It's
had to.
not the preferred solution according to the city engineer.
The parcel's currently R2, and R2 is used for duplex, twin homes?
Double dwelling units, 2 units.
Okay, so I'm trying to understand right now, this is one parcel owned by
Correct.
one owner?
Yes.
And you mentioned something about subdividing. What's that mean?
Well, there would be a subdivision, a party wall division, so that there would be 2 legal descriptions. So at some point in time, the 2 units could be sold separately and owned separately.
Then that becomes more like a twin home.
Yeah, I
Because a
mean,
twin home is, they'll share a party wall, but there's 2 owners. Each owner
Yes.
owns. Okay, so
Yes.
right now, this is different because it's still one parcel,
And it's owned by one,
Okay, but the zoning would stay the same regardless if
Correct.
it is whatever it is now or if it changes in
Yes.
the future.
and the owner has the right to go through the separation
Yeah.
subdivision.
Okay. Okay, that was it. Thanks.
Any other questions, Chivik? Go for it.
Just to confirm, Chris, there is no subdivision before us today.
No.
Thank you.
Can you just show on the aerial or on the photo for the aerial how the car will access that, the easement? So when the church says that's fine, but they still want use of the remainder of the northern lot or stalls, which stalls are they talking about? Do you know?
Yeah, and it's not, this is existing and
Right.
similar to what's proposed. They'd have to remove probably a couple of stalls right here. And they had no objection when the city engineer had conversation with them. They also indicated that they would do the same for the property owner to the east.
Okay. So they have the right to use whatever's in between that. Turquoise
They
line
can.
and the
I
yellow
mean,
line.
I guess the city engineer isn't requiring that Mercy Commons remove all the striping and not have any cars parked there. I mean, it's not really interfering with any, the alley isn't functioning for any other purpose, so.
Right. Okay. Great. Okay. Thank you. So would the applicant like to speak?
Thanks to Chris for a very nice summary of our project. I might take a few minutes to elaborate on what we're proposing would not be changed as it relates to the south alleyway. For 50 years.
I'm sorry, first just state
I'm
your
sorry.
name and address. That's okay.
I'm Steve Springrose, and my wife Julie and I have owned this property for 2 years. It's a 1940s building, built as a duplex. Didn't have a lot of improvements through the years, and in fact, the garage, the double garage that's in the rear is aging. I don't know that you've heard this before, but it's about the parking. I think that a lot of times it boils down to being about the parking. And we find that our guests and residents are poaching on the church parking lot. And so what will happen on a weekend or when a contractor shows up is they drive around back because there's nowhere else to park unless you park on Arden Place. And so we are attempting to put up 4 resident parking and 4 guest parking spaces on the existing property. As it relates to the south side of the property, nothing would change. For 50 years, at any point in time, if the church had said, this isn't working for us, we want the alley to go through, the alley would go through. Similarly for the residents, if at any point in time they said, we want the alley such that the parking is vacated, that could happen. And in fact, that could happen after this construction. And you could still gain access to that rear parking. But it's mutually beneficial to have the shared parking at the rear and the neighborly relationship between the church and the duplex. And so it's been working. We don't want to change how it's working. We're really gearing our orientation more toward J Place. So that summarizes really the south side, unless there are questions. I also wanted to mention that in addition to the church, we've spoken to the 4 immediate adjacent landowners on Arden and to the property owner to the east, and all are in support of what we're doing here. One other thing. The garage as it's drawn on that south side has a 15-foot setback as it's drawn. When Chris and I were discussing this, after the variance had been applied for 2 months ago, she mentioned that 20 feet might be what's required there. So I don't know if there's an administrative way to add a 15-foot setback capability to the variance as the garage would be built to the south, even though it's not what's in the writing that's before you. I don't know if that's possible or not.
Well, because it's an alley to the south,
Yes.
it's different than a public street. So it's
Yes.
actually a 3-foot setback. So you're fine with
Okay.
what you have right now.
Yeah, so if it's 15 feet on that south side garage, we're fine.
You have plenty of feet, plenty of room. Yes.
Okay, I misunderstood. Okay, so that's not an issue. So are there any questions?
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
So it seems to make sense, particularly because the church doesn't have any problem with it, so it's not like you have to negotiate that, even though it is an easement. But I'm just thinking, I think in our documents, we read that the church maintains that space. They plow.
They plow.
So I'm just wondering, you're going to be dependent, instead of complaining to the city if you're not plowed, you're going to complain to the church.
Right.
Are they
And
good
it's
about
been that
plowing? 'Cause
way
you're going to be
for
stuck.
40 years, and having 2
Okay.
years of experience, I don't know how it works, other than I've never once heard a complaint from my residents
Okay.
that it's not getting plowed. If it became a problem, we could probably work with the church to resolve, but if not, there's always the possibility that we could go to the city and say, hey, you're going to have to vacate that alley. We need it to become a city public way. We don't want to do that. It's good for the city. It's good for the church. It's good for the residents. I have spoken to the neighbor to the east, as I mentioned. He says he too wants to turn his garage around. Nobody likes backing out onto 50th Street.
Right.
It's dangerous to park on 50th Street.
Yeah.
And so we're trying to resolve a problem by facing those garages to the alley. And it so happens that the alley is presently paved, but it would not have to be that way in perpetuity.
Yeah. Okay, I was just thinking about what could go wrong, but that makes, I guess you would just negotiate that through if there were something. Okay.
Hopefully.
Okay. Thanks.
Excuse me, so you have lived in the house, how many years did you say?
So we don't live there yet. We bought the house and we're moving toward living there. And we're renting the house to 2 single occupants presently. And so we estimate that we would move into the house in a couple, 3 years.
And you had made some very interesting points about affordability. Can you tell me a little bit more about that in terms of how you see that, what the types of rent you are charging, and
So this is naturally occurring low-income property in the city of Edina. We didn't design it that way. It happens that way. If you take our rent that we charge, it's at the 20th percentile of Edina incomes. And as a result, it's one of the things that we read in the comprehensive plan that the city of Edina is interested in, is having a vibrant community that includes incomes from all walks of life. And so we want to maintain that, and it is a property that exists presently that's a successful property. It's easy, it seems, to get it filled if there's ever a vacancy. We hope that continues. And so it is something where we're aware of the 50th and France community, and we're aware of the affordability and even the carports address the idea that we may not all want 2 vehicles in the future. You know, with the services that are out there as we age, we may only need 1 vehicle. And so having a carport is such that it can be flexible, whether it's for a renter or for us or for a 1 vehicle owner, because then it becomes a pavilion that can be used for entertaining and other purposes.
Do you see if these renovations go through, will your rents have to increase?
So can we gotta focus on the variance that's really not part of the variance
Oh, actually,
discussion.
I find this very relevant because it's a particular housing type that we are looking at currently.
But
in
we're
terms
a
of-
variance for a garage.
Yep. So in that sense.
The answer is not substantially, if any. It's
So you still see it
market-driven.
as being affordable
Yeah, I
after
think we
your
go from one
renovations?
garage to a garage and a carport, so I don't think it would have changed the rent demand very much.
Okay, but your intent is to keep it affordable? Was that the intent?
Yes.
No. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions?
No, thank you.
I don't quite know how to turn this off.
Oh,
so
sure.
pass it.
Sorry, Jimmy. Sorry, there's another question. Wait, you gotta keep your mic.
All right.
I like the rationale behind the carports. It's cool to see the flexibility. Thinking upon that and the nearby roadway being based off of pavers, I know we're trying to encourage some more infiltration and stormwater management. And granted, it is covered. Is there a way in which you could you've considered a different paving choice than just hardscape?
Yeah, we've been working with city engineering related to that, and we're trying to stay under 600 square feet of paving addition. When we don't access the driveway from the front, you can tear up some of that paving and reduce the amount of hardscape. We have looked at various types of paving that would limit the footprint. In fact, if you followed the city codes, the amount of hardscape would actually be larger than the footprint that we've drawn. And so we haven't actually gone to pervious paving. We've looked at it, but it is a rental property, and we're trying to keep it so that the costs are not higher than would be necessary, and it might be that the pervious paving would drive up the cost of the project. Mainly, we've been trying to keep the square footage of impervious down.
Thanks. Yeah, I know it's not required in this circumstance. It just seems, at least with an increase in it and the street already being pavers, you might have an opportunity where it's a natural fitting, even for like half of the driveway going under the carport could be the paver section if it then transitions to patio or something like you mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, now you can sit down. Thank you.
Thank you.
So this is also a public hearing, and is there anyone from the public who would like to speak? Seeing none, is there a motion to close the public hearing?
I move you close the public hearing.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, motion carries. All right, bringing it back to the Planning Commission for comments. Motion.
I would just comment that, regarding the distance to J Place, which technically is a street, but acts like an alley, to me, that's pretty irrelevant because you can think of it as an alley. And then it does solve the problem of accessing the driveway or trying to get out of the driveway from 50th, which has got to be a nightmare during certain hours. The 2 cars per unit, I'm fully supportive of having 1 car stall per unit, and then the, what do you call the covering? Carport. I think that makes sense. It's more flexible. Sometime in the future, you might only have 1 car in that unit anyway, and then you've got, space that's not being devoted just to garages. And then again, as I mentioned in my question, I think my only concern would be if there were any issue on the maintenance of that space, which traditionally has been maintained by the church, the alley. But given that it is technically city land, it shouldn't be an issue. So I don't have any problem at all with this.
Thank you, Sheila. Any other comments? Go ahead.
Thank you. I have 3 comments. First of all, I thought that Planner Ocker did a very concise and thorough and persuasive job in explaining this, and so I had no questions other than the confirm one matter after Planner Acker's presentation. For all the reasons set forth in staff's presentation, I find myself in support of this proposal. I do think Commissioner Berube has hit on a savvy point, though, and I would encourage the city to look into the relationship between the city and the church regarding this road and make it very clear that the city is allowing the church to use the road and that it's not a right. That's just something on this side. Finally, I wish to address the questions about the rents that are going to be charged for this property. I believe that's out of the scope of the Planning Commission and potentially an improper line of questioning to go down when someone feels they have to respond to a question about what rent they're going to charge in front of a body that is weighing whether or not to give that person a variance, whether someone feels they have to make a commitment on their rent. And I think that's out of scope, and I think that should be stricken from anyone's consideration. And I think we should look into that as a Planning Commission matter about where we put some guidelines regarding that line of questioning. Thank you.
Comments on the variance?
I'd like to respond to Commissioner Nemerov. I think that the line of questioning is appropriate because we are looking at right now heavily into affordability in terms of certainly on the commercial side. And I can understand if that is somehow a question that shouldn't be under consideration, but there have been many projects later that we had approved with sort of some understanding or implicit understanding of what type of unit it was going to be. And as you know, we ended up with a lot of luxury rentals. So if we're supposed to be trying to encourage different housing types, I think it's really important to know what types of housing we're talking about. I think it should be a very valid and open question, particularly for commercial proposals. But again, on the residential side, if we are looking at different housing types, again, the applicant himself brought up the question of affordability, is making it a point in favor of ruling for this variance. When a variance comes before us, if there is a reason to consider it, I think all issues are on the table then for consideration. So I do want to say that every commissioner approaches things differently. I don't know that it needs to be somehow rectified because one commissioner feels differently about something. But we could take this up because I do think it's part of a larger issue of understanding what kinds of projects are coming before us and the types of housing units that we will have, whether they truly are going to be affordable.
Okay, any other comments on the variance? Commissioner Marita.
Yeah, so kind of like what Commissioner Berube said, I mean, I think because the J Place is used as an alley, and primarily because so many houses along that street use it the same way, I have no problem with the variance for that. I think that's fine. I'm impressed by the applicants in terms of, thinking about the future and planning for, maybe having fewer cars per residence. And I think that's kind of a thinking that even some big developers don't do. So I applaud the applicants for thinking of that and keeping affordable housing in Edina also. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, go ahead, Jimmy.
Thank you. I agree with, I think, the positives that were set forth. I think it's a great proposal that brings a balance and flexibility to the future and allows at least myself to make a more comfortable decision. And I see that there is a practical difficulty that will be relieved if we do grant this variance. My only concern was the one I brought up is because this doesn't require a stormwater mitigation plan, I don't think that will be the focus of my decision tonight, but it's something that I, again, would want to be on a work plan for us going forward because there is an opportunity anytime there's an addition of hardscape. What are we doing about that? And we see a lot more residential proposals and think this is a unique one with a road right there that is pavers, that it seems like a natural fit to go right up to it. Granted, it's just going to drain right into it, but not from the alleyway side. So that's just how I feel, and I think it's a reasonable request, and I support it.
Thank you. Do you have no? Yeah. Anything? You don't have to. No. Okay. Great. Is there a motion?
I move we approve this request for the variance for 4213 and 4215 West 50th Street as stated in the documents.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Great. Thank you.
Chair, members of the Planning Commission, this variance request is for 4439 Garrison Lane. I will point out, page 2 was set out in front of you. There was a typo. Of course, it's the issue at hand. The first floor elevation for existing was the same as proposed. The existing first floor elevation of the house that is currently there, or if it's been demoed, was there is 877.37. And the proposed is at 878.65. So that should be referenced for your second page. It is actually correct on the first page. Subject property is located south of Garrison Lane. It consists of a single dwelling unit with a detached garage, and there's also another detached structure behind the home. All of that will be removed. Here's a little more detailed view of the existing conditions. It backs up to Garrison Lake or Garrison Pond. This is a survey of the existing conditions of the existing home and the two outbuildings. And what they're proposing is to remove all of that and replace it with a new single-family home. It's a 2-story home with a 3-car garage. It will be a walkout. So they will be doing some regrading of the property. The property is affected by the flood elevation. The established floodplain elevation is at 866.3, so the required flood protection elevation is 2 feet higher. That's the requirement for the low floor, which would be at 868.3. Usually what happens is if they have to elevate that basement to comply with the floodplain ordinance, then the new first floor, which is capped at maximum of 1 foot, is usually impacted by that. And so in this particular situation, the applicant is requesting, it's a 3.36-inch variance from the first floor elevation requirement, and the ordinance allows you to go 1 foot above what's existing there right now. So they want to be approximately 1 foot, 4 inches higher. So that's a little less than a 4-inch variance that they are requesting. So this is floor plans of the project. This would be the basement floor plan, main floor, and then the second floor, which is actually just above the garage. It doesn't go across the entire first floor. The home itself, it has the look of a 1.5 stories from the front, and measured from the average existing grade to peak, it's 31 feet tall. So they could actually be 35 feet tall, so they're well below their overall maximum height. They could be taller, but what they are requesting is a 4-inch difference between what the ordinance would allow for first floor elevation. So this would be the new rear elevation facing Garrison Lake, and then the side elevation of the garage. This puts the home in context to scale with the homes on either side. It will be slightly lower in first floor elevation than the home adjacent at 4435, and then would be higher than the home that's to the right of this elevation. So the primary issue, does the proposed new home meet the criteria for approval of variances? Staff has indicated to the applicant that the design can be modified to maintain the ordinance requirements. So in staff's opinion, it doesn't meet the criteria for a variance to allow a 3.36-inch higher variance than what is allowed by ordinance. The materials that were submitted indicate that the survey shows the first floor elevation would comply, and that they would have 9-foot poured walls for the walkout. So from what was submitted, it would appear that it would be that there would be the ability to comply with the ordinance. The applicant also stated in the application that to use standard trusses is less expensive, and to go with a different system would be about $2,500 more expensive. And economic consideration is not something that the Planning Commission or staff can consider in terms of a variance request. However, in looking at the project from an overall perspective, the 4-inch or less than 4-inch difference in the first floor height is not impacting the ability for them to accomplish what they'd like in terms of the overall height. They're well within their height requirements. They could be 4 feet taller than they currently are showing. So in terms of does the proposed home fit the character of the neighborhood, I would have to say from a staff opinion standpoint that yes, it would in terms of overall height. And with that, I will stop and answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Chris. Are there questions for Chris? Commissioner Berube?
Chris, thanks for your presentation. We've had a couple of these elevation. And I guess can you give us, what's the simple reason for having a variance on the elevation if the aggregate house is still lower than the maximum?
Because the city has a rule that requires that you do not go higher than 1 foot above the existing entry elevation of the home that's currently there. Presumably that means it's not, the first floor isn't popping up much higher than what has always been there.
Okay.
It hasn't been a perfect solution in trying to address these issues.
So if this were going to be a house that was built fresh, it would be the same rule? Is this a scraper? Is this
This is a new home.
It's a brand new home.
Brand new home.
So this is regardless of whether it's.
Yeah. It's a
So
brand new home.
it just feels a little arbitrary if the aggregate house is within the height. But, okay. Thank
But
you.
that's not they're not asking for a height variance.
Right. Okay, thank you.
So I was just wondering, this house is compared to the house that was there on the same property earlier. If that house had been compliant with today's floodplain regulations in terms of basement elevation, then they wouldn't have this issue?
The issue that they are proposing, they could comply and also comply with the floodplain elevation.
Right.
The current home, if it was non-conforming, they could keep it that way as long as they're not tearing down and rebuilding. If they do that, then they have to elevate. And that's the problem we've run into in these situations, is that the basements have to be elevated to be 2 feet above the
Right.
flood ordinance, and most of these homes were built prior to that and are lower.
So they are kind of paying a consequence for the fact that the previous house was lower than we would expect today.
They
Because
have to work within that,
Yeah,
yes.
because they have less space for their first floor then.
They have demonstrated through their survey that they would be able to meet the requirements. They're 4 feet or 4 inches too tall.
Okay, thank you.
Planner Rocker, another good presentation, and I really liked how you kind of balanced all sides, what the arguments for and the arguments against. I had one question on the trusses, and that is, are there any aesthetic differences when the property is built, whether they use the trusses they're proposing or use the different trusses which staff thinks they could use? Does that change anything aesthetically within the house?
And I'm not an expert on that, I'll freely admit. I'm not in building inspections, I don't typically look at that. I've been told that it can affect ceiling height and, where you can put ductwork and that sort of thing. It can be done. Is it the standard solution? No, generally not.
So there is a chance that the trusses the applicant wishes to use have a value to the property separate and apart from the difference in cost, that it might enable them to do other things in the house, the way they build the house otherwise, or could it be different in how the basement ceiling looks?
Perhaps, I guess I think that would be a question for the applicant and their builder.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Thank you very much.
Any other questions for Chris? No. Chris, did we get a letter from a resident on this one?
We've gotten quite a bit of correspondence.
Okay.
It was sent directly, through the correspondence.
Right.
All of it has been supportive.
In support, okay. Great. All right, is the applicant here? Would they like to speak? That's perfect.
Is that on?
It should be on. Just state your name and address.
Alex Swigum, 4439 Garrison Lane, and I also brought my builder Dale Peralt of Peralt Construction with me tonight. Yes, we are asking for, as Chris pointed out, we're asking for 3.36 inches for the variance with our basement height due to the 100-year floodplain being at 866.2 and us having to have a basement floor at 868.2. And I know financially it does not play anything into factor with this. There are some other things with the property that I wish to do down the road with my job and having to stay in a certain fitness level that I do a lot of things overhead and I need a certain height of ceiling for that with if we were to change the trusses and put in what would you use before terminology?
The drop truss?
Yeah, the drop trusses and stuff like that, then that would be slightly problemsome to myself. I guess one of the things that I was struggling with the process is it's 3.36 inches, which from the street I don't think you're even going to be able to tell a difference with the property. And I guess Chris did a really good job of walking through everything, so if you guys have any questions for me.
Okay. Any questions? Commissioner Lee?
you realize that it's not about the inches, so someone could come along and say that they wanted, 7 inches. We're not here to determine the amount of inches. I also want to clarify that you are actually going up a foot, so it's from the street, it's not staying the same. You're given
Correct.
12 inches to work around since it's a new house.
Correct.
Right, so you've already taken that 12 inches, you want an additional 3 inches more.
Correct.
So it's not about 3 inches, it's really about 15 inches.
And without the 100-year floodplain, we would be able to get that, and we wouldn't be
Yeah.
having to come here tonight at
And
all.
that is just sort of the nature of the parcel, and we have many parcels here that have that issue. I think that yours is actually one of the more advantageous, because you're already pretty much 0.3 feet, 3 inches, basically.
Correct.
Is where many people have to come several feet out of that floodplain.
Right, it was 3 foot 3 inches for the house down from us.
Yeah. So I think in this particular case, it is a little difficult to kind of justify it simply because if someone wants equipment. But other than that, just a comment, the roof height, we have had a consistent roof height maximum throughout the city, but if you're open to taking suggestions, I would say potentially look at maybe using some hip roof forms as a way of bringing down the overall height in appearance. Those kinds of things can help make a house look less massive. So relative to the neighbors around there, it's not strictly about roof height, but it's sort of that mass as well.
And I was just under the impression that roof height has nothing to do with this, correct? We're 4 feet lower than what is allowed?
Yep, I'm
Correct.
just making that as a overall, just a suggestion. It has no bearing on
Okay,
on the.
thank you. Yeah, I believe the house to our, it would be east, if you guys have the picture right there. It is not that much taller than that house that is to the east of our property.
They're one story though.
No, there's a 2-story home.
Well, they're, again, massing wise,
Okay.
they appear to be one story with a very large roof.
Any other questions for the applicant? Sheila?
So, again, just to keep it simple, if I understand what this is, really is, in the city, you could be within variance and have a basement that's 8.8?
8.9.
8.9.
I believe it'd be 8.6. Or 8 foot 6 inches tall.
You have to get your sunglasses.
And you're asking for 3 additional inches. I was thinking you're trying to go 9 feet.
So instead of having trusses notched out at the edge,
Yeah.
3 inches, so that they would sit, the top of the floor would sit 3 inches lower, that it would just sit directly onto the concrete wall instead of having the trusses notched out.
And the end result is your basement ceiling is higher.
Would be 8 foot and 9 inches, I believe.
Gotcha,
Yes.
instead of 8 point.
8 foot
6.
6 inches.
Okay.
8 foot 9
And a half.
inch and
Okay.
something, yeah.
So rather than having a basement that's 8.6, you're requesting to have a basement that's 8.9?
Right,
Ish.
yes. And
Okay.
I know finances don't have any weight in this, but
Yeah.
I am a working person, and that would be significant to us. And
Yep. Okay.
Well, and I think the second part of it too is kind of the design factor. We're already doing a 9-foot poured wall
Yeah.
to get that. But then the truss design, usually you build a truss that goes on top of that and you have that ceiling height that planes across. They're asking a truss now to drop down
Yeah.
into the basement off that 9-foot wall. It's not now that we're gonna pour a smaller wall.
Yeah.
So there's a 9-foot wall already being
There's
poured,
already
I
there.
guess. It's a truss design to meet the first floor elevation. So it's kind of like you're walking in and taking a step down, kind of.
Yeah.
You're lowering your floor, I guess. It just seems kind of counterproductive, I guess, in
Yeah.
my opinion.
That's helpful. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, so this is also a public hearing. Is there anyone here who would like to speak? Seeing none, is there a motion to?
Motion to close the public hearing.
Thank you. Second? Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, so bringing it back to the, go for it.
I can go after some.
Go.
So, I mean, I'm not very experienced with variances, but from my understanding, and I don't want to offend anyone if I am misunderstanding, but this doesn't really seem like it's hurting anyone, and it's also just like they have less space because of the fact that regulations changed, and it feels like a kind of like a cruel action just to force someone to pay more because this rule exists and we want to enforce it.
Thank you. So yeah, 3.36 inches. Wow. So I think we get what that is. It's, you know, it's only that amount, so who's going to give, right? And that's where we're stuck right now. And I think to your point, I mean, there's the people proposing this, they are stuck at a bottom limit based off of the floodplain. So there is that reality. And for all the support of the neighborhood and it only being 3 inches, I mean, I'm in full support of this. For a lot of the same reasons, it's a practical difficulty that this variance will relieve, and it won't alter the character of the neighborhood at all. They're 4 feet below the top of the house, or how high they could go. So yeah, it's only 3 inches. So you could give that way, but you are starting from a different baseline. So.
I just have one comment, which is, I've been on the Planning Commission for 4 or 5 years. We've had some very intelligent and bright and wise beyond their years students on the Planning Commission, and I just want to congratulate, before he goes off to college, Commissioner Yash, is that pronounce your, on upholding that tradition tonight and throughout the year that he's been with us. I thought he just hit it right on. Very insightful. Thank you.
Okay, again, I think that staff's recommendation is pretty clear, and as a planning commission, I know I could not vote in support of this because it's about process. And we've had this discussion before. I don't think it's about us determining who has the right to have the right ceiling height. Again, it's more about the floor-to-floor height. And previously I had mentioned that, and I'd like to see this on our work plan, that we come up with some number that we're willing to accept. 9-foot floor-to-floor height, 10-foot floor-to-floor height. This applicant will get a 10-foot, 4-inch floor-to-floor ceiling height from the basement to the top of the first floor. That's pretty generous. And we are only talking a few inches. But again, I don't want to get into the inches again. I will just read this again. Staff cannot support the variance request given conforming design alternatives and recommends the denial of the variance as requested, meaning that this thing can fully be compliant without requiring a variance. Now, if all it takes is for someone to come and argue a case for inches, then we will be here all the time. So please think about setting precedents and following the direction and action as a planning commission member where our jurisdiction lies in interpreting the requirements and the regulations and what merits a variance. Obviously, we would all want to be up here doing only what the applicant asks because it is always a hardship on the applicant, but that's not our job. Our job is to look at the standards, the setbacks, the rules, the heights, and there is a background to that 1-foot rule that came from the massing task force, and they were very, very studious and deliberate about coming up with that 1-foot limit. that has to be seen as very generous. So I don't think that, again, that it's our position to get in and kind of arbitrate whether it should be 3 more inches here, 12 more inches there. They're only 3 inches out. It can be done. It has been said by our staff that it can be done without requiring a variance. So I will not vote in support of this.
Do you have a comment? Let me just, anything down here?
Yeah.
Sheila?
Thank you, Commissioner Lee. I appreciate what you're saying. And I think it is important that we have consistency. And it is true, people wouldn't be here if it wasn't considered a hardship, right? For me, though, I think I'm going to look at the spirit of the law versus the letter of the law. And the spirit of the law is that the houses aren't out of sync with the character of the neighborhood. And for me, then, the aggregate height is a more important number. If within those floors, they have one floor that's a little higher than their neighbors and one floor that's a little lower, I think that's sort of irrelevant to people other than the homeowner. And 3.5 inches in a basement can be huge. It can make the difference between feeling like you're in a cave and feeling like you're in a real room, and can make the whole house a lot more livable. And that's not even to mention the practical piece of it. It's cheaper. You've got some particular use where you're going to need those 3 inches. I think in this instance, it makes total sense to approve this. And I appreciate that staff, given the rules of the city, would have to not agree with it. But as a planning commission, I think it's our duty to look not just at the letter of the law. We're not bureaucrats. We also look at the spirit of the law, how the neighbors feel, what it does to the community. And you're going to have a more valuable home because you're going to have a really livable basement. And so I don't have any problem at all with this, despite the fact that it's possible to be compliant. But why would you do something that's less than the best you could do just to be in compliance? So I would advocate that we approve this. The other thing I would just mention is I would speak differently if this house were bumping up against the height and or over the height, or if neighbors had concerns, but I don't see any issues here at all.
Thank you. Any other comments? Commissioner Navarro?
Comments Commissioner Berube made. The neighbors approve, the heights were well under. I think those are very important factors. I also do think Commissioner Lee made very many good points that we need to consider, and those are always points that you need to balance and consider in your weighing. I think Commissioner Berube laid out the mindset of that. One point that Commissioner Lee stated was precedent, which I think is really an important thing to consider. In regard to that, however, I do wish to point out that we in the past have approved a variance for someone so they could get a hot tub because of physical demands of their employment. And in the past, variances and subdivisions have been approved that were virtually the reason why, so they could to enhance the resale value of the land. So I don't think approving this, especially with all the other balances that Commissioner Berube is hinting at, is out of character for past actions by the city of Edina.
I respect all of the opinions that have been shared and the comments. I have to state that I'm in favor of the variance from some of the other reasons that have been expressed, especially that the overall height is compliant. And I too look at the overall spirit and intent of the law rather than perhaps the letter, which may be right or wrong, but I would be in favor of this. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello.
Yeah, I'm going to pretty much put my hat in the same ring, and say, I mean, I think Commissioner Berube explained it best in terms of the spirit of the law, because, you know, this house will be at an intermediate level between the adjoining houses, and so one of the reasons why this rule exists is because, you know, people were making houses that stood out on the street, and this house doesn't do that. Both at the door level and also at the total height. So I think for all those reasons, I mean, I think it's our job to make these kinds of decisions. So I think it's a perfectly reasonable variance.
All right. Well, I also agree with the kind of the majority of the Planning Commission. I feel that the inches, it is inches, and it really isn't impacting the overall impact to the neighborhood. So I would support this also. So would anyone care to make a motion?
I move we approve the variance request for 4439 Garrison Lane as stated in the documents.
Second.
Second. Discussion? Oh, go ahead.
If I may add, we should add findings.
Right, because it was, okay.
Correct.
You're right.
I could offer a few. The hardship is caused by the high water elevation, that a 8-foot 9-inch basement is considered reasonable in this instance, and it would not negatively impact the character of the neighborhood. A few to consider.
Yeah, go.
Carrie, do you think there's any value in adding the finding also that the applicant has professional reasons for wanting the higher ceiling related to his career?
We really shouldn't consider individual needs. We really have to look at it. Is it proper for the next person or the next? It's difficult to look at the individual needs of the person. We need to look at the physical, the project itself.
Okay, thank you, Carrie.
All right, so there's a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Nay. Motion carries. So thank you. All right, so the next item is another public hearing, and this is for a subdivision with variances at 5841 Oakland Avenue.
The green light went on. See ya. Okay, thank you, Chair, members of the Commission. Our next request is for a subdivision with a few variances. This property is located north and west of Pamela Park. You can see the property highlighted. Property is unique in that 59th Street dead ends essentially a third of the way into this property. There's a slope here, 59th slopes downward toward the park. Whoops. So here's a closer look at the site. You can see 59th Street dead ends here. There's also a walkway from 59th Street, that a set of stairs that provides an access to Pamela Park. A little closer look. This is a look at the existing house on the property today. This is that sidewalk that steps down to 59th Street. So what the applicant is proposing here is to tear down that existing single-family home and build 2 new single-family homes. The applicant has run the 500-foot median of the entire neighborhood, and the median, the lots proposed here, generally similar to the median. The medians came in at 6,700 square feet, 134 feet deep, and 50 foot wide. This entire area was originally platted as 50-foot lots. As they developed over time, and we'll take a look at that a little closer, Sometimes they don't always develop at 50-foot lots. People combine 2 lots, build 1 home. And in fact, on this block, there were 6 50-foot lots that were actually combined into 5. And I'll show you that in a minute. So based on the setback requirements, this would be the building setback requirements of the 2 lots, assuming a subdivision. So as you can see, because 59th Street comes in, a 25-foot setback would be required. There is also, so this 59th Street, originally when it was platted, the street was to go through, but because of the slopes, that didn't happen. In the past, the city vacated that strip. So half of that vacated right-of-way went to the property to the north, and half went to the property to the south. On this particular lot, an easement was obtained as part of that vacation for future utilities and also a pedestrian access again down to the park. So what's requested here is a subdivision. Lot width variances, actually just for one lot, 75 feet to 50 feet for lot 2. Lot 1, that southern lot, is actually 80 feet wide because of that right-of-way that was vacated and dedicated to that property. Setback variances for lot 1 from 25 feet to 10 feet and from 10 feet to 5 feet on the north lot line. So as you can see here, here's the 80-foot width of the south lot. So because the property is 80 feet wide, a 10-foot setback is required to the north lot line. If this were a 50-foot wide lot, a 5-foot setback would be required. So in all, because of the right-of-way, or because of that existing easement here, no building can take place in the site. So in effect, the site really is a 50-foot wide lot in terms of buildability. So primary issues for consideration for the subdivision are the findings for the variance met, and the same with the setbacks are the findings met. So I'll separate those two. First, in regard to the subdivision, staff believes that the findings are met. The practical difficulty is caused by the existing location of that home. A previous property owner purchased 2 lots and built 1 home on the 2. We believe it's reasonable given this neighborhood. So again, the site was, or this whole area was originally platted with 50-foot wide lots. This dashed line here indicates properties that have been combined. So you can see these 2 properties were combined when it was built. The sites that I was referring to the north, there are 6 lots up there that were platted into or developed as 5 lots. So each of those 5 lots took 10 feet. So each of those lots is actually 60 feet wide on that block. Across the street on Oakland, all of those properties developed as under the original plat at 50 feet wide. This is a graphic that we often look at when we have similar subdivision requests. As you can see, we've had a number of them in this Pamela Park neighborhood. The ones that are starred with the red star were approved by the city council, and those that were not were denied. So the site that we're looking at today is located right here. So you can see we've approved 2, roughly a block away, and there was 1 that was denied on Kellogg just a couple of years ago. That site is located right here. So in the past, when those subdivisions have been denied, the most important finding has been when we look at both sides of the block, what is the lot configuration? So in this particular block, the reason for the denial was you've got 200-foot wide lots to the north. There was 1 on this side, or maybe it was this lot here, and there was a couple of 75-foot wide lots here, and the properties to the north were 70. So there was a variety of lot sizes in that neighborhood. So that subdivision was denied. So just to point out also, on the west side of Oakland, north of 59th to 58, there are 12 homes, again, all 50-foot wide lots. On the east side of the block, there are 10 homes this way. Should the subdivision be approved, there would be 11. Again, that's due to those 6 lots that were combined into 5. Secondly, in regard to the findings for the setback variance, again, staff believes that the setbacks the variances that are requested here are reasonable. The practical difficulty, again, is based on the location of that right-of-way that extends about halfway into the site that causes this 25-foot setback. Also, the location of the pedestrian and drainage and utility easement limits the buildability of that property. Also want to point out the property to the south. So the property we're looking at is to the north, right here. To the south, where that right-of-way was vacated, this was vacated and dedicated to that property to the south. However, there was not a easement over that property. So they were actually able to build into that area. This plan did come before the Planning Commission a few years ago, and a 10-foot setback was granted. That house is under construction today. So with that, staff believes that a similar variance of 10 feet is appropriate, again, similar to the property to the south. And also with a 5-foot setback to the north, we believe that's reasonable as well, given the additional setback that's required to the south. So with that, staff is supportive of the project and would recommend approval of the subdivision and the variances as requested, subject to the findings in the staff report. With that, I can stand for any questions.
Thank you, Carrie. Do we have questions for Carrie? Commissioner Lee.
Thanks, Carrie. Did engineering look at those as building pads? It looks like that the topography is pretty steep. It works right now for the single house that's there. It seems to stay kind of clear of that. But once it's subdivided into 2 lots, I imagine it is going to have to start cutting, particularly in Lot 1, into that steep slope. Did they have any concerns about that?
They didn't. So generally, again, you're right, it does slope downward. So and a more detailed plan would be submitted as part of any building permit. But the idea is for the flow to drain this way and then toward 59th Street. So it wouldn't flow to the property any more so than it does today. On the north lot, there's a little holding area that would hold runoff before proceeding easterly.
So on Lot 1 on the south side there, where you've got 40 feet, 10 feet mark, that's really all going to have to be retaining wall in the future. Right now, it's not retaining wall. It's just they've got looks like a deck. And just there is a concrete wall, I guess. But basically, it just naturally slopes there down to that. So that will have to be reinforced and supported. I'm just making a comment that by subdividing, I think that potentially there could be some topography and water drainage related issues once you start trying to build 2 separate houses versus 1 now.
Go ahead, Sheila.
Thanks, Carrie. I have a question regarding technicality that was brought up in one of the correspondence that we received. So this is someone in the neighborhood who said the guidelines say that it says guidelines currently in effect that the majority of the lot sizes dictate lot sizes for new construction. And this person pointed out that 6 of the 10 on that side of the street are larger than 50. And so that's more than a majority. But of course, if you were to include the lots on the other side of the street, you would have more like 30% are larger, 70% are the same size. So I'm not sure what the guideline actually says, and if you recall what it actually says, does it specify only on the one street, or does it specify in the neighborhood, or what's the technical wording on that?
Yeah, there's no specific wording for, it's really a judgment call for the Planning Commission and Council to take a look at. On this one here on Kellogg, they did look at both sides of the street and determined that a variety of, was a wide variety of lot sizes.
So this letter writer is correct in saying that the majority of the lot sizes are larger, but they're taking the view that it's only on the one side of the street.
On the
and a
east
reasonable
side.
person might agree that it should include the other side, and therefore that might be an irrelevant argument.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Carrie, can you go back to that slide 20 or 22? Maybe 22 was a good one. Okay, so regarding lot 1, I just want to understand the drawing, make sure I understand the drawing. The blue shows the property line, that's correct?
Correct.
And then starting at the south end, it looks like the staircase is where that dotted red line is?
Yeah, the staircase, the easement does extend a little bit onto the property to the south. So the staircase is in this location here.
Okay, and then immediately north of that, you have a snaking red line with arrows for the utility easement?
Yes, so the easement is this entire area.
Okay.
So no building could take place within that easement.
From the, how many feet is it from the northern dotted red line to the bottom blue line?
30 feet.
30 feet. Okay, so, and then on the building pad, that's going right up to the dotted red line, it looks like.
Correct.
Okay, and so, okay, and so engineering is okay with the building being that close to where the utilities could be located?
Yes, the initial proposal actually did extend into, they wanted to do it similar to the house to the south, but given the easements that's there and the potential to put additional utility lines, protection of that pedestrian path that's very important to the neighborhood, we wanted to preserve the easement area.
Okay. And 5-foot setbacks for the properties, for the buildings with 50, for lots with 50 feet, I mean, weren't those set in era of smaller houses?
Yeah, yes, that is true. We did, so it used to be on a 50-foot wide lot, you needed a setback of 5 feet on each side. We've since changed the code to say 5 feet on one side, you need at least 7 on the other.
Okay. So in contemplation of the larger houses that we have today, we changed the code to say you have to have at least 7 on one side.
Correct.
That was a decision that was made. Okay, thank you very much, Carrie.
Oh.
Carrie, question. One of the letter writers or residents that contacted us expressed a concern about potential water runoff on the stairs in the winter months. Did engineering have any concerns about that, or is it enough of a distance from the new proposed pad to avoid that?
Yeah, they didn't mention anything, any concern that they had on that. That is something, should this go through, we could draw that to their attention. Is there any issues? But there is, again, there's the 30 feet separating between the house and the stairs.
Yeah. Thank you.
Go ahead, Sue, did you have a question?
Yeah, I was able to pull up the engineering report. Okay, so I think it's significant that it said that the proposed plan does showing these redevelopment of the property. The impervious surface now is increasing from 25.4% to 43.7%. So I think that's significant. It does mention that there may be retaining walls required on the southern side of Lot 1, in which case, if they are over 4 feet, they're going to need to be designed. And by the contours here, they will be over 4 feet. I'm just pointing these things out, but thanks.
So just to be absolutely clear, nothing is happening to the pedestrian walkway, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
And remind me, Carrie, so at 5845 Kellogg, there was a lot of issue with the drainage, right? Weren't neighbors experiencing flooding? And it seems like that was one of the issues with that too. And do we have that concern here also? Because I agree, like we really are increasing the impervious coverage, which is kind of...
Yeah, I don't recall. There is the
Don't you?
the drainage area on this, and they may need to do something like that with those lots to the north when a specific building is proposed for that site.
Yeah.
It's likely.
Okay. Did you have something?
Yeah, and one of the ones that we recently denied, as I recall, that lot had a lot of old trees, and that factored into our consideration a bit. And I don't think we read anything about trees on this lot. Was there anything relevant?
I did not hear about tree issues, but when you mentioned that on the property on this lot.
Yes, there was a big tree in the middle of the lot.
Yeah, and the existing house was built on the south 50 feet of, and so you're right, there were a number of very mature, large oaks
Yeah.
on the north part of that
It sounds
parcel.
like that's not a consideration in this lot.
Right.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
It's wooded, but
Thank you, Carrie. Would the applicant like to speak?
Hello. Is it on? Yeah. Oh, okay. My name is Steve Sandberg, and I'm here with my siblings, Karen, John, and Craig, and we grew up at 5841 Oak Lawn. My father purchased the two lots, or the combined two lots in 1949, and hired contractors to finish off what had been started as a foundation. So we've, and he lived there until a year ago, except for the last 4 days of his life. He was in the hospital, but he took care of that property and really loved Edina, as we all have fond memories of growing up here. I was baptized in the Grange Hall over here because our church was using that when I was born in 1950. But and he always he would say, I've got two lots, so mine should be worth twice as much as everyone else's that's being sold. And so it was his wishes. He was a wage earner and thrifty, and it was an investment for him to have this house and keep it up. And so that was his wishes that we split it back into two lots. So that's what we're asking for, and I thank Carrie and the staff for being really thorough in going through this for us.
My name is David Knabley. I'm with Civil Site Group, the civil engineer working on the subdivision with the Sandbergs. And just a couple of points I wanted to bring up. You had questions about the topography and grading on the property. And again, Carrie's right that these are just preliminary plans. When somebody comes in to build, assuming these get approved, they'll have to have thorough engineering drawings. But currently we're showing no retaining walls on there. The grading is, the house itself is acting as the retaining wall. So it's just grading along the house, and the slopes are less than standard 3-to-1 slopes through there, so we're not showing any retaining walls anywhere around the house. And then drainage, a couple of people brought up drainage as a potential concern, and the drainage here actually all flows to city right-of-way. Nothing flows to any adjacent properties. I know in the city of Edina, that's a big concern, is increasing drainage to neighboring properties, and none of that will be happening here because both of lot 1 and 2 drains to the east, but there's a low spot and a swale on this property that ultimately drains to 59th. So there'll be no increase or any impact to drainage to any adjacent parcels here.
Any questions for the applicant? Oh, okay, Jimmy.
Just one quick question. We don't see how far along, you know, how this could look, but is the thought with that, the connection of the driveway to 59th, is that going to be eliminated, providing some more permeable cover, perhaps?
That's kind of the current intent, is that most likely the 2 driveways would come off of Oakland.
Okay, thank you.
And the driveway in the back would be eliminated.
Mr. Knable, could I just follow up on your drainage comment? You said that the properties will drain to 59th ultimately. Is that above ground drainage, or any of it below ground?
Right now, it's all shown as surface draining, swales there, but apparently the engineer at the city has said that there is a drain in 59th that potentially could be connected into. So they potentially could put in like a drain tile system or something on that east side and tie it in underground to some existing storm sewer in 59th Street.
That sounds, to me, I don't know, I'm going to look to people with expertise up more. That sounds like a nice idea. Keep friendliness with the neighbors, the less water that's above ground in the street.
Sure.
Thank you.
All right, well, thank you.
Thank you.
So this is also a public hearing. Is there anyone who would like to speak? You can just come to one of the podiums and just state your name and address. And then just watch for that red light.
Hello, my name is Robert Braun, and I respect Gary and the thoughts of the family very much. I've been there since 1993. My grandparents owned the house from the beginning, 1952, and I have taken on the home since then, and it's very near and dear to my heart. And to be honest, I might have to read some of this. I'm the property just behind lot 2, if I might say, and I'm right down the hill. So as I sit on my patio, I see the Sandberg residence right behind me, and knew him very well. Some of the main issues I've probably come into here is the aesthetics of, let's say, the change to the neighborhood has been wonderful. I have wonderful things to say, but now it's personal. And the reason I say that is that I'm going to sit in my backyard, as I 8 years ago have allowed the next door neighbor to build, and now I sit on my patio and I say hi to them in their windows in the upper. And this one will do the same. There is no drainage. There is the potential for that to be with the old growth trees that are directly in a shade path for my house and my patio, which is something I would like to conserve. The idea, though, is that the runoff currently, due to the house next to me, yes, they put a small drain tile along that house into my backyard. But if this ends up being the same way as that, I'm still having flooding problems in my back. I'm a walkout basement, and it is about a 15-foot at least. It's a sledding hill, and with all due respect, this will very much affect my backyard and maybe my other neighbor to the south. If you zoom in on the property, you will see that I have a shed and a patio right behind the property, and I worry that this is going to not only do that, but the building has cracked my foundation of the house that's now being built on the south side of the walkway, and it is a monstrosity. And I have no problem with the progress and the improvement of the neighborhood. It's been great, but with this case, it's unfortunately going to change everything about my property, and unfortunately, it might squeeze me out. There's no question of that. The flooding is real. Every spring, I have a trout stream in my backyard, and I plow the snow every winter to the south. There isn't a lot of drainage. Drainage tile and retaining walls, great, but I still think there's going to be a problem. So, I don't know about my time, but
At the red light.
Okay, my apologies.
No worry.
That-
It's been done before.
I just want to know that I have the utmost respect for everybody here, but it is serious to me, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hello, my name's Scott Armstrong, and we actually purchased my mother-in-law's property at 5845 Brookview, or actually 44, sorry. And my main concern is with these 50-foot lots. Originally, when this was all established, how many years ago, these 50-foot lots were built for ramblers. And now what's happening, as we all know, they're building 6,000 square foot monstrosities on these homes. 5901 Oak Lawn has one of those monstrosities. It's actually, I don't know if any of you heard, a truck just went through and plowed through that whole railing system that goes down 59th Street, took it out about a week ago. That house you can literally touch from the railing. My concern is the kids walk up that railing to get to the school bus, and with if a new house of a 6,000 square foot monstrosity would be built on lot 1, that would create a huge wind tunnel between that area. I'm directly below that. That's one of my concerns. My other concern is with the drainage, of course. I guess the only other concern I have, and this is kind of a side note, is you mentioned about trees. There are beautiful oak trees on that property. There's also one that's on the city's property that has a right-of-way. Because of 5901 Oak Lawn wanting to bury their lines, the NSP or Excel had to come in and trim that tree. They wanted to take it down. The guy at Excel said, I can just remove that oak tree, that beautiful oak tree. It's within our right-of-way. I can remove it. I think that's something the city has to look at, especially with trees. I called the city at the time, and they said there's nothing we can do. So that's my only other concern, is there are beautiful trees on that property too. So, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Motion to close the public hearing.
Is there a second? Second, all in favor? Aye. Motion carries. Okay, bring it back to the Planning Commission for comments. Go for it, Jimmy.
All right. So since I've been on the Planning Commission a few years now, we've seen a bunch of subdivision requests, and for me, I have a certain set of principles that I stick to with how a property might, when it's subdivided, alter the essential character of a neighborhood, and that is how I've weighed the decision, either pro or against. If I'm generally in favor or kind of neutral on the project, as I am with this one. That's why the most recent one, Indian Hills, I didn't support because it was a unique property relative to the other ones, and there's a power in diversity and variety, and that's what makes a neighborhood unique. And that's why I also did not support the one just west of this, because that side of the block has a nice variety of bigger lots, and that's what's unique about it. This one demonstrates the opposite. It is the only one that's really not similar. I mean, the other ones are 60 foot, but it's all pretty uniform. So for that reason, I don't believe the subdivision would really alter the essential character of the neighborhood, and so I'd be in favor of it for that, as the three elements that the staff highlighted in the report, that being the last one. I will say the aesthetics, which we're not seeing, which could result in this, are another story which we have yet to find out, and I think the neighbors' comments are duly noted. If we see really tall buildings there, I think the 5-foot setback between each of them might not be appropriate as well if it were really tall and maxed out in that footprint, height-wise. And for neighbors to the east, knowing that they're downhill, I mean, you would be looking up at a doubly tall building, just because what's there right now is just a one-story building. So that's not what I'm making the decision on, because we don't see what it could be, but that's likely, and I think, that I don't know if we can control that, but the drainage is obviously a big deal to neighbors, and it might not hurt to put another drainage element on lot 1 of these two to help further support the project. Thank you.
And Carrie, just for a quick clarification, but we are approving this with those variances already, right? So we would not see this again.
Correct.
Unless
That is
they
correct.
want even additional variances.
Right.
Okay.
I appreciate what Commissioner Bennett said. I also think about the character of the neighborhood, and this is the only lot that's larger than the others. So the subdivision makes sense to me. I'm really concerned about the trees, the drainage, and then interesting comment about the wind tunnel. But the thing that I think about is we're not seeing the models of the homes. We have no idea. But likewise, if it's not subdivided, I mean, most likely the lot's going to be sold, and it's going to be sold to someone who's going to sell it or is going to tear down the home. And we have no idea what that home is going to look like. And on a lot that's 100 feet wide, you can really build a monster home. And there's a high likelihood that if that single home gets torn down on that lot, you will see a huge house. And there's no guarantee they do any better on the drainage, or they do any better on the wind tunnel, or they do any better on the trees. So there's an uncertainty either way. But I think in the case where it's very rational that this lot be divided because it started out as 2 lots, it fits in with the rest of the neighborhood. And so that's just a logical conclusion. There's too many uncertainties either way. If you don't subdivide, you're just as likely to have the same issues. So I would propose that we go ahead and approve this.
Commissioner Bennett?
Just want to bring something else up. I mentioned it when I was kind of just meandering through a bunch of thoughts. But Commissioner Nemerov did bring up the point of if a new home was built on a 50-foot lot, it would require a 7-foot setback to have that separation. Was there consideration with the city staff of having each one a 6-foot setback to honor that cumulative 12 feet, or was that not really discussed? Because I think we know to make the homes be built on those small lots, it will have some height. Was that a consideration, Carrie?
We did take a look at it. We looked at more, if it's 10 feet on the south side, it seemed reasonable to allow a little closer on that north side. But with this one, because of the variances, you can approve if you don't think that 5-foot separation is appropriate, because they could have just a 10-foot separation between the two. If you don't think that's appropriate, you could certainly modify that or simply not grant the variance to the north lot line. Then they would have to have a 10-foot setback. So it would be 10 feet on lot 1 and Lot 2 could be 5 feet. So there'd be at least a 15-foot separation between the two. You certainly could do that.
Thanks.
But, Jimmy, were you talking more about the south setback?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
not
the
between
south.
the two
Yeah,
new
kind of
ones.
between the two homes.
Between the two new ones. Yep, that was what I was referring to.
Okay.
I guess my worry is like the more we squeeze things, the more it would likely go up, which I think is the aesthetic concern of the neighborhood, you know, because you kind of think of living on that street, but there's backyard neighbors that changes do alter their perspective.
Go ahead.
I agree with everything everyone said up here, and I think Commissioner Berube comments very good. I just wanted to add one thing to one of Commissioner Berube's comments, which was the house to the west on Kellogg, which we did deny. That actually is what played out, how Commissioner Berube said this could play out. A really big house was built, and they tore down the beautiful tree. It was just an awesome tree, one of the nicest in the. And so I don't know if denying the subdivision will prevent some of the issues. Commissioner Bennett has been said very insightful things about drainage and the combination of the subdivision and the variances. And it struck, that last item struck something in my head that it is kind of hard to get my head around the variances without knowing what's going to be built. Subdivision, I think, is a different standard, isn't that right, Carrie? I mean, it's a different standard of approval than a variance, isn't it? We could bifurcate these two things.
You can. Let's say if you didn't grant any variances, Lot 2 is essentially unbuildable. You know, when you see this.
Well, it wouldn't be.
So that's what makes it a little bit more challenging.
We wouldn't be denying variances, I'm thinking. We'd just be denying variances today. If we saw what was going to be built, the variances could be approved at that time. Is that correct?
Yeah, you'd be approving a subdivision, the creation of a lot that's unbuildable. So it's a tricky one. But
I would guess we're also putting the owner in a really difficult situation, because if they don't get some variance in the future, they may decide to sell the lot as is for someone who's going to build a big house on the one lot, right?
So then the three alternatives, I guess, would be approve as is. I mean, there are probably more alternatives, but approve as is, approve the subdivision and not the variances, or approve the subdivision and variances, but perhaps different variances, kind of the path that Commissioner Bennett was noodling on. Okay.
Yep.
That's what we think. Okay, I don't know if I have a solution, but okay, thanks. Think about that for a minute.
Yeah, I appreciate that comment from Commissioner Nemerov, actually. I've been going back and forth. So initially, when I looked at this, I thought, okay, that's pretty cut and dried, 50 wide lots. But I think that there are those issues that by subdividing, that you could potentially be creating situations now that impact the surrounding areas. I also believe that sometimes when lots have stayed this way for a long time, there was a reason originally. So maybe they were subdivided, yeah, but that last lot never really went, and somebody said, well, I'll take the both. So not every lot is necessarily buildable, and so here we're trying to help the applicant create a buildable lot as part of the subdivision. I appreciate that that there is an option potentially to just approve a subdivision. I mean, that's basically, I think that's a little more cut and dried. It is difficult to know now or even be asked to determine, is this lot buildable, and do we have to go through the gyrations now to make it buildable? I think we can just look at for what it is. Does it merit a subdivision? And if it does so, will it not cause undue harm by changing the situation? Right now we know it works. But then I flip to, we are talking about increasing density and trying to allow more housing types and room for other homes. We're even talking about putting accessory dwellings on the same lot. So there's a lot of factors to look at, so I ultimately don't know where I'm going to land on this one, but maybe leaning a little more towards that idea of, okay, if it's a subdivision, I may go for a subdivision, but I'm not sure I'm comfortable yet with approving the variances, and maybe leaving that for a later date.
I too share some of the same perspectives that have been expressed from a subdivision perspective. I'm supportive if I look at the overall character of the neighborhood and the lot widths to the north and to the south. It seems to be a reasonable fit and a reasonable ask. Where I'm less comfortable is on the variances, and that's my sticking point for the moment, at least in terms of making a decision this evening. So.
I think, the neighbors bring up some good points and very real concerns about drainage and trees. From what we've been told, it sounds like drainage has been or will be addressed, and that there'll be no drainage onto neighbors' properties, theoretically. And assuming that's true, I feel like the drainage issue has been addressed. I feel for the whole tree issue because the lot behind ours was a very wooded lot with a lot of oak trees, was completely clear cut to the very edge. And so it's a huge issue, and I think the city needs a stronger tree ordinance, but we don't have one, unfortunately. So I don't think we can I don't feel like I could vote against it because of the trees at this point, because we don't have that kind of ordinance, although I think we need one. And then in terms of altering the character of the neighborhood, I think splitting that lot, just looking at it from a geometric point of view, it would perfectly fit the neighborhood. I don't think there's anything unusual about it. There are many houses in the area that have that size. So I'm leaning towards approving this variance.
Thank you. Commissioner Nemiroff.
Carrie, can you help me understand the variances a little better? It looks like there are 3 variances we're considering: lot width variance, lot area variance, and setback variances for lot 1. Is that correct?
That is correct. So there's no setback variances for lot 2. It's those 2 setback variances on the south lot.
Okay, and focusing on the setback, that was my first question is, why are there not setback variances needed for lot 2? Do you know what?
The square that's drawn meets all of our setback requirements. There's 7 feet to the north, 5 feet to the south, and the front and the rear. Setbacks are also met.
And then for lot 1, if it's 5 feet and 10 feet, why is a variance needed? Why are different setbacks applied for these 2 lots?
Yeah, great question. It's because of the lot width. So that south lot is 80 feet wide. So it requires greater setbacks compared to the 50-foot lot. So that's part of what staff is saying is the hardship. We're applying an 80-foot wide setback standards to essentially a 50-foot wide lot because of the drainage and utility easement.
I get it. Okay. Thanks a lot, Carrie. That's very helpful. Okay. That might be helpful. One different comment, though, and that is on the stairs. And Mr. Armstrong and some of the letter writers mentioned it, and I thought I experienced it myself. I am surprised how close that 5901 building is to the stairs, and I'm very surprised. One thing that I do, and I suggested outside this meeting, the city take a look at that. I don't know what can be done, but I agree that in the winter that looks like a problem. However, turning it back to the property in front of us, it doesn't look like, as designed, that this property will cause the same kind of encroachment upon the stairs. I see, Carrie, you shaking your head. Is that kind of how you... Yes,
I would agree. In hindsight, we maybe should have taken a little bigger easement on the south lot when the right-of-way was vacated, to get a little more protection from... Because at that time, the previous house was set quite a ways further to the south, 30 feet from the stairs.
And then turning back to the one today, is the city pretty comfortable that the setbacks as designed here will not add to the problem with those stairs?
Yes, because we'd be preserving that 30-foot wide easement.
I'm just thinking, I don't love to come to these meetings and think out of the box. I like to have my thoughts beforehand, subject to what I hear from fellow commissioners, the applicant, and members of the public. But one thing I'm wondering is if, I heard from the public the idea of a wind tunnel. Is there any value? Is it possible even for that little bump out on lot 1 of the property on the building pad? Is it possible or realistic or reasonable to have a lower height requirement for that piece of property as a condition of getting the variance to avoid any kind of wind tunnel effect?
I think increasing the spacing between the two homes may have a bigger impact. It's not anything that we've done in the past, require homes to be not as tall.
So you think it perhaps like if we move that southerly solid red line a foot or two to the north, that might have a...
Potentially, although let me take that back. Because this lot is 80 feet wide, they would be allowed to build a taller home on lot 1. So I'm going to change my recommendation to the height standards for lot 1 should be consistent with a 50-foot wide lot. I think that would be a reasonable condition.
Thank you, Carrie. That's, again, something I just thought about tonight, and so something you just thought about tonight also. So thank you for your dialogue.
Just one last thought I have, something I've been gnawing on. It was clear just from the neighbors there is an existing drainage issue already. I mean, so it's not like one is being created through the potential of this. However, a solution could be created better, and I think they're trying to propose it. It doesn't look as exaggerated as I'd hoped to see, just looking at the contours. And it looks like, at least on the east side of Lot 1, it looks like there is a way to try to move the water right toward the road. Obviously, if there's a lot of water coming, it's going to just keep going the direction it was trying to head. So maybe there's more that can be done on Lot 1 specifically as well, and or Lot 2. I know the engineering has looked at it, and I think we're comparing it to a lot of baselines. Or do they feel comfortable that there won't be runoff onto the other properties? I mean, are they clear with that?
Yes, in my conversations with them, they didn't have any issues, although hearing from the applicant, if there's a drain tile and they're suggesting they should tie in to that drain tile, that could be another condition that you add.
Okay. That would be something I would support as a modification, just as a way to, again, help provide more of a solution in the creation of this. I don't think it's exacerbating any problems, but this would help address them and at least solve some of the drainage issues that are going on. I don't know how we get around the tree issue. Do we know how many, just based off of these drawings, it looks like there's potentially 2 or 3, well, you can't tell the size from the drawing, larger trees that would be taken out? Is that, do you know?
Yeah, so there would be trees removed. Per our tree ordinance, any tree that's removed within the building footprint or driveways do not have to be replaced, but any tree that's removed outside of those areas would have to be replaced.
It looks like the backyards on both of them, going all the way to the lot line to the east, are modified, meaning trees that are even in that footprint could be subject to disappearing. And just looking at the aerial from a satellite and just hearing from the neighbors, there is some cover that's there, and maybe there's something that we could encourage to try to grade things around the trees. I don't know if we've done something like that before, Carrie. Could you speak to that?
Yeah, I don't recall us doing that in the past.
It doesn't look like the grading is shifting that much. I mean, you're talking like things are moving like a foot or so, but it does look all different, so.
It does. I would agree that those trees would likely be removed under the plan that's shown.
Thanks.
Sheila.
So, thinking about the setback variance for the north side of Lot 1, for an 80-foot wide lot should be 10 feet, but they want 5 feet, right? Now, do I understand correctly that the reason typically for having a setback from house to house is that you don't want an existing home with a new home that's closer to it than they were expecting? Is that, or is there some building reason or some other reason for that?
Yeah, I think it's a couple of things. The space between the houses, we wanted a little more.
But I guess what I'm getting at is, both houses, well, there are no, both houses would be new, right? So the owner or purchaser of Lot 2 would know that there would only be a 5-foot setback because we possibly have approved it beforehand, right?
That's correct.
So it wouldn't be like an existing homeowner having a new house encroaching on their space or anything, right?
Right.
So that's, okay. So to me, that doesn't seem like a huge problem because they would know what they're getting into beforehand. So in terms of that one variance.
Correct.
Okay, thanks.
And Carrie, I just have clarification. I hate to be using the paper, but I couldn't find this in my online. But so your 2 exhibits showing required setbacks and then the building pads with variances. And those building pads are a lot shorter in length than what they would be allowed, right? So are we agreeing to not allowing?
No, because of our building coverage requirements. While they're showing much larger, that wouldn't meet our building coverage requirement. They were just demonstrating the required setbacks. So they wouldn't be able to build a building on that lot as large as even the red squares that I'm showing.
Got it.
Because of our building coverage.
Cool. Okay, good. Thank you for that clarification. And Lou, just to understand what you just said. So you were saying that to, since it's an 80-foot wide for Lot 1, to still maintain that 10-foot? Or to not grant the 5-foot?
No, I
Oh,
was
okay.
saying it makes sense to allow that because there's no existing house to worry about it.
Okay. All right. Any other further comments or motion? Go ahead.
I'm more comfortable with the variance request for Lot 1 after understanding that the standard or requirement it's being held to or asked to be held to is for an 80-foot lot. I am in agreement with other comments that if there's something that we could do regarding potential height, that might be a fair trade-off, and then also address some of the potential concerns of neighbors behind it.
Yeah, okay. Good point.
Yeah, I think that's a good catch. So that would reduce the height by 5 feet.
Yeah. Okay, is there a motion?
I move that we approve the subdivision at 5841 with the variances as noted in the document. In addition, adding the stipulation that the height on Lot 1 would be as though it were a 50-foot lot versus an 80-foot lot, and that analysis and study is done to reduce damage due to draining. Is that how we want to word that?
Connect to the drain tile?
Connect to the drain tile. And then,
I know sorry to jump in, but there was talk of potential of eliminating the driveway to 59th Street. That could be another condition.
and eliminating the driveway to 59th Street. Anything else?
Just to be clear about the second condition about the analysis, are we saying they should integrate that? Is that?
Yeah, I think we need to have a stronger than analysis. But
Yeah, assuming there is a drain tile there, we should connect to it.
And if there's not?
We'll know that answer for sure by the time it gets to city council.
Great. Is there a second?
Second.
Second. It's a discussion. No? Is there a motion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Did you wait? I just said aye. Oh, okay. Cool. Great. All right. Well, thank you. All right, so next is community and community comment. So if there's anyone here who'd like to speak to anything that's not on the agenda, you can at this time. See none. Going to move to the sketch plan at 701 and 7025 France Avenue.
Okay, thank you, Chair, members of the commission. So this property is located at 70th and France. It's the southeast corner. The site exists today with the U.S. Bank building, and there's a medical facility in there as well. It's about 66,000 square feet in size. The property is zoned PCD 3, Planned Commercial District. So it has the same zoning as, say, the Galleria to the north and Southdale. However, there's a distinctive difference between properties north and south of 70th Street. That's in regard to our floor area ratio requirement. Properties to the south of 70th are allowed an FAR of 0.5. Properties to the north are allowed up to 0.1, assuming it's a mixed-use development. So same zoning, but somewhat different in terms of the intensity that's allowed under current zoning. The site is guided in our comprehensive plan on our draft plan as Community Activity Center. The existing comp plan, it's designated as Mixed Use Center. So just to refresh the commission, Southdale itself and the Galleria had that CAC, Community Activity Center, and we've combined those two into one Community Activity Center. The idea being the more intense development in between France and York, based on the Southdale area study. So what the applicant is proposing is a mixed-use development. They would build a new U.S. Bank building and drive-through, a little over 5,000 square feet, a 4,000 square foot retail building with a drive-through, probably a fast food type restaurant, Caribou, McDonald's kind of thing, and a 7,000 square foot retail building on the corner, and 120 unit apartment building, and an 80 unit multifamily apartment building that would be designated for affordable housing. So the site itself is just under 6 acres. So based on those FAR requirements that I mentioned, they could build up to about 125,000 square feet. The existing uses on the site, it's about 66,000 square feet. So under current zoning, they could double the density roughly in terms of square footage. What they're proposing here is about 270,000 square feet. So it's more than doubling what's currently allowed under that current zoning. So in looking at our compliance table with the existing standards, so they would be requesting flexibility from our setback requirements. The biggest one, as I mentioned, the floor area ratio requirement, and the project would be short parked in terms of number of parking spaces by about 120-ish. Parking study would be required as part of this project, and a traffic study, so we'd need to flesh those issues out. So what would be required is a rezoning from the current PCD3 to planned unit development. As we've talked about projects with affordable housing, we want to put them into that planned unit development category where we can require it within the ordinance that affordable housing take place. But they, again, would be requesting flexibility through the PUD for that floor area ratio requirement. As stated in the design experience guidelines, the flexibility like that is not a right, but rather the natural byproduct of a fair exchange for benefits, collaboration, and quality in development. So we have a lot of discretion in this one. Again, looking at our pyramid of discretion, we're down into the green categories. And even if they were to come through with a standard zoning, the variances are pretty substantial. So we, even through the variance process, would have quite a bit of discretion. So some of the issues that staff has outlined, and also Mick Johnson with AFO provided a memo that was included in your packet, albeit a little bit late. Some of the issues match. They have generally adhered to the dividing the property into blocks. In fact, this site was essentially shown within the Southdale District Plan, having roads or pedestrian connections through the middle of them. One thing to note, we talk about the 200 by 200 square blocks. The northern blocks are a little bit larger. It's about 300 feet wide to provide the space for that multifamily unit building. We talk about 50-foot setbacks along France Avenue. The proposal here is for 35 feet and 30 feet for the U.S. Bank, so they're not consistent with that guideline. Rather, they're more in character with some of the existing buildings. The Vitamin Shop is to the west, kitty corner, and then the new building that are set closer to the street. That's the kind of thing we're trying to get away from. So they're not consistent with that standard. I mentioned the short parking. The project is a little short on green space. We've talked about providing comfortable pedestrian connections, especially east-west, to connect to the promenade. As you can see, some of the sidewalks here are adjacent to surface parking stalls and pavement. We're looking for more public space, more green space, that public realm. How does this, one of the questions we want to ask is, how does this project fit in and how does it add to the character of the district? The comprehensive plan mentions discouraging single-story development with surface parking within that more intense areas between France and York. So, while granted, this is a vast improvement over what's there, and we are reducing surface parking, at least the west side of the development is pretty traditional suburban style development with surface parking lots. There would be underground parking under the multifamily apartments. So with that, I will stop and answer any questions you may have, and the applicant is here to present the project in a little more detail.
All right, thank you so much, Carrie. Do we have questions for Carrie at this point? Go ahead.
And this may be a question for the applicant, but Carrie, are you aware of any ground challenges with underground parking? That was not a very well worded. Are you aware of any challenges presented by the subsoil with developing underground parking on this site? And
Off the top of my head, I'm not.
Oh, okay.
I know it's often an issue. Thinking of the 7200 site, this is a little bit further north, but there is a relatively high water table issue. And even thinking of the Southdale Office Center that's just to the north and west of the site, extremely high water table in that area. So I'm guessing we probably can't go down too far with underground parking here.
Great. Okay, the applicant come up.
Hi.
Oh, sorry. Don't wait for me. I'm reading. Go.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Kevin Meyer. I am with Corporate Real Estate. I lead design for Corporate Real Estate at U.S. Bank. Here to support our submission for sketch plan submission for 70th and France Avenue. I'm here also with one of my colleagues, Rich Variano, who's in the audience here, who leads our redevelopment group. Together with Ryan Companies and RSP Architects, we're really excited to discuss the proposed forward-thinking redevelopment of our site, inspired by the Greater Southdale District Plan. I plan to keep my remarks brief so we can turn the stage over to the experts on our team who will share details of our submission. U.S. Bank has a long valued history at this location, and we feel proud to be part of the Edina community. Our branch building has anchored the 70th in France location in Edina since 1977. So this is a big decision for the bank to make, particularly because it's such a prime location on the corner of a great downtown location. So why would we make this proposal? We're making the proposal because we recognize it's the right thing to do. We no longer need the size facility to support our customers. And as a member of the Edina community, we recognize that our property is a key parcel for the Greater Southdale District Plan. Knowing this, we've been seeking the right partner for this redevelopment for several years. And we really believe that we found it with Ryan Companies and the proposal that you have before you. However, the development does need to meet some key criteria for U.S. Bank to make this worthwhile. And our criteria really is based around our purpose and core values at the bank. The development needs to really strike a balance between the four key constituents that we serve. 1 is our customer. Number 2 is our colleagues. 3 is community. And number 4 is our shareholders. For us to support the development, it must balance all 4 of these. So starting with the customer, the bank proposes to build a new branch on the southwest corner of the site to reinvest in the experience for our branch customers. Also, by sacrificing the corner location, the development proposal allows us to provide uninterrupted service to support our customers throughout the redevelopment. We'll stay and operate out of the existing branch, build a new one, and then relocate to the new one, and our customers will constantly have access to support services that we provide. Number 2, our colleagues will benefit through the new branch that provides the right employee experience for them to better support the community and their customer base. Number 3, the community. The community of Edina will benefit from a redevelopment of our parcel to a newer high-density mixed-use development neighborhood that is the right thing to do to support the continued evolution and future vision of the community of Edina. In addition, our branch will actually contain a community room that can be used for local events, for charities, for financial seminars that will be open for public use. And then the 4th constituent is our shareholders. Our new branch, as proposed, needs to maintain high visibility for a highly visible location and easy access with the newest technology and key customer amenities to support our business. We need drive-throughs, we do need parking access, and we do need signage in order for us to stay competitive in the Edina market. We believe our proposal strikes that balance well and support the development that we put forth as a joint venture with Ryan Companies. In closing, we feel the sketch plan as presented is win-win-win for the City of Edina, U.S. Bank, and Ryan Companies, and we look forward to partnering with you further to bring this vision to reality. Thank you.
Hi, Planning Commissioners, Gentlemen. I'm Carl Runk, Director of Real Estate Development at Ryan Companies, and I'm also with Josh Ekstrand from Ryan A&E, who is the project architect for our proposed 70th and France vision. Which one here? I'm just going to highlight a few of the key themes of our proposed plan here. And today, this is from 70th Street, what it's been for 40 years, as Kevin said, in terms of a pretty opaque building from that era, the 1970s, that served its purpose. And U.S. Bank's made a major decision now to move it forward to the future into a smaller footprint with more transparency. If you go to the next slide, is within the package you received, this was not in there, but this is really meant to highlight big picture. What we're trying to accomplish or proposing to accomplish here is really taking this contiguous super block as it is today and carve it into smaller blocks that are respectful of the nearby scale buildings and single-family neighborhood to the west. We really think it does create the street rooms on the interior of the site, as well as street rooms on France Avenue and 70th Street that the Saltdale Experience Guidelines are seeking. It's transforming it from a single use as an office park, essentially, as it's been for all these years, into more of a mixed-use total lifestyle center with housing options that are needed to retain Edina residents. The housing we're proposing here are in the highest demand right now in Edina that are oriented towards empty nesters with larger units and amenities that are oriented towards empty nesters who are currently can't find that housing option in Edina, as well as affordable housing in high need for folks looking for a walkable location like this. And the total, as Carrie mentioned, it's 40% of the units we're proposing, so far in excess of the 10% minimum. We're also moving the site from being exclusive and not public. There's no public realm at all there today to we're creating about an acre of public realm. When you count everything we're proposing, that's public right-of-way and public green space. inside of the site, including new pathways and patios, seating, green space, lighting, stormwater features. Today, the building you saw in that picture before, as you know, it is opaque. It doesn't follow the guidelines in terms of being transparent in the ground floor. Our ground floor commercial uses and residential uses along France and 70th are transparent. You'll see life and activity and contribute to the daily experience for those who live, work, and visit this site. Clearly today, the project, the building that's there today disengages from France Avenue, and we're proposing that these commercial buildings be pedestrian scaled and engage with France Avenue. And they are 2 stories in terms of height. They're over 20 feet. They're not 10 feet in height as a single-story building you think typically is. So we believe they are comfortable and an appropriate scale given the Salty Experience Guidelines desire for similarly scaled buildings on both sides of France Avenue at this location. And future connections. We definitely have future connections in mind with, as you see here, something that's not really allowed in the package, but we want to see a crosswalk built from this site across 70th Street where the roundabout is to Galleria. There is no crosswalk there today. We'd like to see that happen. That's on public property. We also have set this site up with the east-west connection to connect to the promenade as well as the north-south connection to Hazelton Road. So we certainly think the site sets up well for future connections. With that, I'll turn it to Josh Ekstrand to go through more of the details of the proposed project.
Good evening, Commissioners. As Carl mentioned, I'm Josh Ekstrand, National Director of Design for Ryan Companies, and leading the design efforts on the overall master plan and the non-bank buildings at this point. So a couple more images of just the context around the site and the existing site today as a reminder, and we'll come back to a couple of these as we move through a couple of the slides moving forward here. So speaking to the Southdale District design guidelines specifically and how we feel we're addressing those directly. And Carl touched on several of these, but breaking down the super block and enabling future connections to the promenade and Hazelton Road. We'll speak to why exactly the east-west road is happening where it is when we get to the site plan, but certainly trying to acknowledge the ideals included in that in the guidelines. Contributing to forming street rooms around France Avenue and 70th Street, and as well as the new internal streets. So really trying to create experiences that have kind of like for like across the street from each other and create a cohesive experience around them. New housing options that are in high demand for Edina residents that people either can't find here and want to stay in Edina and are leaving the city, or can't move into Edina because affordable opportunities are not available to them. And then finally creating pedestrian-friendly pathways and sustainable public realm where there is not currently anything. It's a very kind of isolated site that is very auto-centric and kind of impermeable to pedestrians and kind of creates a desert of pedestrian opportunity. So project summary is including approximately 5,500 square foot flagship U.S. Bank branch. That's kind of the first and foremost impetus for the project, keeping U.S. Bank on site in a great place for them to continue to grow and thrive in the community. 4,000 square foot standalone retail building with a drive-through. 7,000 square foot multi-tenant retail building at the corner of 70th and France. 120 market rate multifamily units on the northeast corner of the site. Approximately 80 workforce multifamily units. And then public realm enhancements, as Carl mentioned, with sidewalks, interior streets, outdoor seating, and green space to make that occupiable to people from outside the site and to encourage users in from a pedestrian perspective. So again, the existing site today, about 205 surface stalls and and 7 drive-through lanes. And one thing that I think is important to look at and actually ties into some of the questions about underground parking and the water table is that our underground parking, although not in this specific location on the site, a little bit further east, but actually sits at about the height of what the current drive-throughs are, which is significantly below the height of France, which again kind of just makes the site from a pedestrian experience kind of difficult to walk around and uninviting, but I think it also speaks to opportunities for going below grade with parking elsewhere on the site without a water table concern. As has been mentioned, the site is currently zoned PCD 3. We are seeking an FAR of 1.1 across the overall site and about 36 dwelling units per acre between the two projects. So some of the spaces and types of buildings that we're trying to create are really heavily focused on a great pedestrian environment. And I'll speak to where we're creating these and how we envision those being used, but creating opportunities for outdoor seating, both for restaurants on the site as well as just casual uses, benches, walking paths, heavy greenery, lots of shading, and kind of a variety of different planting and other outdoor amenities that can be used, again, by people on the site with better connections, hopefully in the future, to the promenade, pulling people from the east to the west, as well as people from the Galleria having a destination to come to the south, hopefully through a proposed crosswalk. Higher quality exterior buildings on the multifamily project, so really kind of looking to create an urban feeling with those pieces of the site and do a very high level of finish and high quality architecture. And then really focus on pedestrian-friendly, engaging retail experience. So many of these images you can see very clearly have a very close relationship to the sidewalk, have opportunities for outdoor seating, have different types of ways to engage with them as pedestrians, and oftentimes multiple entries into the retail spaces. So the site organization itself, as has been mentioned, the idea is to keep the bank operational in its existing footprint while the new bank is constructed in the southwest corner. There is an existing curb cut that's a right in, right out to make the bank fit and to allow enough room to have a second development to the east of that. We're trying to minimize how far we move the curb cut towards France, which we think as we get further into traffic analysis, the less we can move it, the more successful that's going to be. So that kind of establishes the dimension of the north portion of the site, but allows vehicle access through east-west as well as pedestrian access all the way across the site, and presents the capability to connect through to the promenade should the site to the east ever be redeveloped. 7,000 square foot retail on the northwest corner with opportunity for outdoor space and entry off of 70th, as well as certainly the convenience parking on the east side of that for retail. And then it's been, the locations of entry, we think actually would be beneficial to have entries off of these pedestrian patios, in addition to off of the parking lot side. But we have seen elsewhere that it has been successful to incorporate those on the France Avenue side. So that is something we could explore, but we think co-locating those entries at a corner with still visibility from France and from the parking would be mutually beneficial to both the kind of experience of the outdoor spaces and the operation of any retail within them. The really big pedestrian improvement here, or kind of the really big nod, is the approximately 45-foot wide pedestrian strip connecting 70th to the new east-west street. That's really an opportunity for different types of seating spaces, certainly lots of plantings, kind of a meandering walkway that separates the residential project from the convenience parking for retail, but really has the opportunity to be an exciting space and to be something a little bit different than we've seen elsewhere in a very kind of urban green space that is kind of a mini promenade connecting 70th to that walk to the east-west street. And then that continues on with a slight offset down to potential future connection to Hazelton Road should the site to the south ever become redeveloped. Our 120-unit multifamily project, as has been mentioned, is approximately 270 feet long, north-south. However, we've intentionally made pretty significant massing shifts to minimize the presence of that as a long 270-foot long wall. So this is about a 70-foot bar here, approximately 130 feet, and then another 70 feet. So as we see some of the perspectives of how this looks elsewhere, we've intentionally tried to minimize the kind of overbearing massiveness of a long facade and make that kind of read as multiple smaller buildings within a related architecture. And then the affordable project to the south is approximately 80 units and has an entry across from the some of the entries into the multifamily project, and then vehicle entry for that happens on the south side, where we do have a few residential surface stalls. But I'll speak to the parking solutions in a moment to clarify one thing that was unintentionally miscommunicated. So general diagrams for how we've looked at the site, and again, this reiterates a lot of what I talked about at the beginning with kind of alignment with the district guidelines, but breaking the block down, taking kind of the cue of the, as close as we can get to the 200 by 200 Portland grid, but given that curb cut location, at least getting it into quadrants that allow flow through for vehicles and or pedestrians, as the case may be, for each different path, but breaking down the massing and making the site more permeable. Creating vehicular connectivity, so actually creating a publicly accessible opportunity to get around the intersection of France and 70th via a through connection to get between the roundabout and the curb cut, both directions. Allowing pedestrian connectivity through the site. So this is obviously something we've spoken to quite a bit, but by doing the smaller masses of retail buildings on the north portion of the site, we're actually allowing multiple opportunities to break through the site and get into the different types of spaces, patios, other ground plane amenities across the site, rather than having a long wall of a more dense building that you have to walk around or completely along to get into and access further into the site. Surface parking reduction. So currently we have about 205 surface stalls, on the garage or on the site. We are proposing a 28% stall reduction, and but for the 11 surface stalls in the southeast corner, these would all be exclusively for convenience retail for the bank and the retail to the north. We intend to meet market demand with parking for the residential projects fully within the footprints of those below grade and structured at grade. And I think that some of the numbers to accommodate that were miscommunicated to staff, but we would have market supply parking for both of the housing uses. And then setting up for those future connections. So allowing for connections east-west through future to the promenade, should those sites support that in the future, allowing connections south and north to Hazelton Road to the south, and hopefully north with a new pedestrian connection across the 70th at the roundabout, and connecting to France, and as that becomes a more pedestrian friendly environment, bringing that traffic through the site. And then from setbacks, we just wanted to speak to this, that as has been mentioned, we are matching approximately what is across the street and what has recently been built. We understand that there is a intention of trying to move away from this in general moving forward. However, that said, these are new projects that were recently built, so they're here for a while, and we think that maintaining the experience and kind of matching that on both sides of the road enhances this as a consistent corridor rather than kind of heavy on one side, light on the other as you have setbacks. The other kind of significant contribution that having the 35-foot setback allows us to do is designate a significant amount of square footage inside the site to that. I mean, there's a finite amount of area that we need to place buildings and parking on to meet market requirements for making the deal work. And the more we can aggregate that to a unique kind of urban interior site that has
slower traffic levels and more ability to control the pedestrian experience around it, the better that space can be. And the 35 feet is still allows for some gracious landscaping and good experience along France from the pedestrian perspective. Just for the sake of comparing this to a couple other intersections in Edina, we looked at 50th and France, which is obviously a very, although there are a lot of vehicles through there, it's a very pedestrian-oriented feeling retail area, and that has very minimal setbacks, just the sidewalk width from the corners and from 50th and France, versus a very auto-oriented corner at 66th and France. Obviously, this is very pedestrian unfriendly and has, 130-foot setbacks if they're even measurable. So we really think that this 35-foot is a very good kind of compromise of giving enough room to have a great pedestrian experience and ease that buffer, but still kind of match the existing context around it and improve on how that feels without creating a very distinct feel different from what's around it. So a few views looking at the site. This is looking at that approximately 23-foot tall retail on the corner of 70th and France. You can see the market rate multifamily project behind it, and then the affordable project to the right of that. You can see US Bank down here at the just south of the east-west cross street. And then this is looking north on France. So US Bank in the foreground, visible signage to make sure that that brand maintains a presence. And you can actually see here, we have that 35-foot setback everywhere along here, but that community room actually comes in an additional 5 feet. So it's a 30-foot setback there, but that's a very transparent, visible community activity center that's hopefully going to bring pedestrians in and a lot of activity in off-banking hours that I think will be very well recognized by being, prominent on this strip. This is a view looking at that entry of the US Bank. So the community room being in the foreground there, that's that kind of 5-foot protrusion from the rest of the street wall that we would create. This is a view from 70th looking at the market rate multifamily. So you can see our lobby would be down here. We have a small kind of motor court entry experience into the covered parking behind that, but we've pulled this face back by about 30-ish feet to make sure that that doesn't feel like one massive wall, that as you are driving down 70th towards it or driving into the site, you kind of experience that as changing volumes, and you can perceive it as multiple masses rather than one large unbroken facade. And then a view looking at the retail a little bit more directly on as it's crossing France with the newly built building with the E-Trade and Roti in it to the right and behind us. Overall view, this is a similar view to what Carrie had shown earlier, but you can see kind of how much landscape buffer this allows for along France, some really great different types of plantings, and you can also see how those patios and different pedestrian experience kind of create a porosity that you can pass between, so that if you start down France or moving up France, you have the ability to get off of that and kind of enter into the site if you don't want to kind of stay in that heavy traffic zone during rush hour along the busy road. And then looking back the other way, so you get a little bit better view into that motor court and kind of entry experience for the multifamily project here. You can see entry location for the affordable project here, and then you can see where that vehicle access enters through down here. So that does also allow for future connection to the south for vehicle connection as well, should that be sensible in the future, I guess. And that's what we've got.
Great, thank you. So Carrie, before we bring it back to the Planning Commission, let's just kind of walk through sketch plan again. So this is very detailed, right? And we were starting to kind of take a little step back to not have so much focus on kind of these details. So I think what I just would like you to do is just to kind of remind the Planning Commission what we're really discussing now is to really kind of give them the overall like setbacks and connectivity and how it relates to the Greater Southdale Area Plan, and to not focus in on architectural design or bike racks or just details like that, because we will have that opportunity in the future. But so this is still kind of the big picture to give them. I don't mean to be putting words, but yeah, if you could just remind us so we don't dive into details that we shouldn't be, because I know it's tempting to, because they go beyond.
Yeah, it's an excellent question, because as we've talked about, our desire to move into sketch plan where we don't get a lot of detail, it's going to take time. As you recall, Ryan was before us with the Estelle project, and they had that. So they were used to, because that was what we had been doing, providing a lot of detail. So when they
I don't need to be critical of
when they
this.
approached the city, they didn't even know about that. So they had already had the plans developed. So that's why we're seeing such highly developed plans. That said, with the sketch plan review, your comments can be or should be big picture, what you like, don't like. We have a lot of discretion with this one. We really want to focus on those design experience guidelines. So it's the big picture items, not necessarily getting down to the detail of bike racks, building material. Granted, there is some detail here, so you could provide some feedback in regard to the architecture, just big picture generally, though.
Great, thank you. Okay, so who would like to start with big picture? Go ahead, Sheila.
So thank you. Very interesting. So overall, my general thought is, I think it was the second slide you put up where you said, here's kind of what was and here's what we want to be. Was the words on the two lists. So basically, you're going. It's so much better than it was, and it's moving in the right direction. But as I look at it, just kind of more of everything. So, except parking. But, the connectivity, the landscaping, it seems like this spot could be such a great area in the Southdale area, and maybe it's not quite living up to its potential, at least what we saw here. When you were talking about the public spaces and showed some of the examples, those looked really engaging. So because we're just seeing it at the high level, maybe that's what you intended. But for example, when you see the big quadrant and there's the meandering path from 70th going south, but then it kind of stops. Like if you had more of that, but in the whole, a whole cross section of that. The affordable housing is great. I applaud that. The crosswalk to the Galleria, the community room, the public space in general, but maybe just more of it. I guess one of the things that I would question is in an area like this where the city is kind of inviting you to have more than one story. On France, I wonder why you don't want to have more, and particularly when you could really showcase US Bank and make that more of a presence. And so I don't know if there's a reason, but clearly on the corner there, you can't drive by and not see the US Bank sign, and you're kind of giving that up, so I'm not sure what you were thinking, but it would make sense to me that there would be more of a presence there. And then the big thing that I think of when I see this is asphalt. There's a lot of asphalt. So again, the connectivity, if you can make the meandering path go both ways, so you've got the crisscross and maybe a roundabout or something in the middle. And then if there's anything else you can do, hiding that parking underground. I know that adds a lot of expense, but it seems like maybe it'd be worth it if you went up, instead of just one story, if you went up a couple more stories, it might be worth it then to go down and hide some of that parking. But it's definitely in the right direction. I think it just needs more of all of that good stuff. Yeah, I think those are my general thoughts. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else ready to comment? Go ahead.
I agree with your comments overall. My thoughts were somewhat similar in that the project is exciting, and I thank you for presenting it. And there are a lot of great concepts with it, but it feels like you could take some of them further. The setback on France is somewhat of a concern, or the lack of a 50-foot setback. And I too wonder if, for the retail, if you went up from a financial standpoint, if you could offset the cost of adding underground parking and then using that space saved from surface parking for more green space. The east-west walkway or pedestrian walkway seemed to be lacking in much greenery compared to some of the conceptual drawings that you shared. So adding more green space along those walkways and making them seem a little bit more like adhere to the concepts that you shared, to me would make it more interesting. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else right now?
Well, I think this is very, very unique. Okay. Could you tell me again, what's the height of that, the 77,000 square foot retail building? And the 4,000, what was the height you said on that?
About 23 feet.
23 feet, okay. In some ways, I do think it works. All right, I have to say right off, if you haven't read Mick's thing, this is it. So I have to agree with everything that Mick said in here. And this is how you match what's in the Greater Southdale plan. But seeing your elevation, I'm just asking the question whether or not could it be possible to still carry out that vision and have something like this on this corner. The reason I say that is this corner is really, really, really busy. And I realize if you pull up too close to the corner, which is what we have across the street, it's almost like nobody even wants to stand in front of those buildings. They just, please get me to the back of it and I'll go in that way. So I see why you're in some ways, you are trying to keep the entrance and everything to the back. Lower scale, it could potentially work. I just think that you're lacking something that ties this whole thing together. It's got to have this sense of, it's right on the corner of France and 70th, that development. And I think what we're looking for is, it's that green space. The buildings themselves, no complaints at this point, and obviously you're just in sketch plan, but it's got to be something place. And for people to understand that. And I think you've got pieces here, but it doesn't tie together well. The housing, in some ways, I feel like that's the right spot for the housing. I know that Mick has said, why not put the housing on top of your retail, line it up on the street? But yet, he also says, if you do that, we want a podium. You need to step back. That's how you get your height up there. And in essence, you are creating the street wall, which is what the Greater Southdale is saying. We want that street wall. it's a little bit shorter than what they're saying, but again, maybe you've got something here that's, because it's lower, that the topography is lower, maybe there is something you can do there to bring it up just a tad, but I think there's also, it's not just about height. I kind of like that progression and being able to see the housing in the back and not feeling that the housing is right looming over at that intersection. Just a gut reaction, the apartment buildings themselves remind me a lot of buyer lease, that buyer lease development. And so if you're gonna really wanna stand out, give us something that's really high quality. You know, people don't necessarily perceive that as being the most highest quality development there. And all these projects honestly are starting to look a lot alike. So again, find that thing that will make it a place, and I think that's gotta be our public realm. And then with your materials on your apartments, really give that expression, carry it through the rest of the building. I would even say pick one of these arteries and commit to it. The east-west connecting over to the promenade, go for it. You know, I know that in some ways reading this thing from Mick is that we are asking you to do some of the design that in some ways as a city we have to commit. We have to let you know and do a better job of what it is we want and where we expect these to be. But this is such a key parcel. You guys could set that up right now and say, this is where it feels like it's got to go. And yeah, maybe it doesn't line up now with Warner Stellian or, you know, the pancake place, but eventually it will come to fruition. So make it work for your vision and tell us what that is. And I think you'll get going in the right direction. So I think it's a decent start. And read Mick's thing, because he's got some great nuggets in there.
Thank you. Go ahead, Jimmy.
Hey there. How's it going? All right, 10 o'clock. Whew. So I just want to start off by saying, you know, if this were built right now, you know, just nothing else, it's a great addition. And it's a great complement to what was already there. It's a vast improvement. I have a lot of other feedback to build off of that, but I guess to echo what other people are saying, definitely going in the right direction, and it's bringing forth the change that we want to see. So it's nice that we're seeing potential change. I just have a couple bigger questions for you guys, and then have my own set of feedback that is kind of tailored to a lot of mixed feedback as well. Kind of bigger question, specifically bigger. What type of height were you guys ever considering here? I know we're seeing a limit based off of, you know, stick construction on the east side. Have you considered more height? And if not, why? And why not?
So Commissioner Bennett, I think you're asking, why isn't Estelle over here?
Oh, absolutely. No.
So, there's a different time, a different place 2 years ago already. And the economics of that we find for doing condominiums, it's tough. And we're working downtown Minneapolis, as you've seen, with Luigi Berardi, our partner, on the 11 condo tower. Condominiums are not something that we're fully going after. And we really have our eggs in the 11 condo tower right now in Minneapolis. And for an apartment building, we think this is the right solution here. The project work you're seeing behind this was approved, I believe, a year and a half ago, and it's still not launched. It's tough to make those work. Really hard to make the concrete building like that work with apartments right now in Edina, and we think this is the highest and best use for a apartment building that works for empty nesters at this location. It's walkable. So that's a short explanation. Different time, different place. If we had this site at the time with Luigi Berardi together, I think we'd propose 2 high-rises here, in all honesty.
Okay. That was my whole point to some of the audience that was in contention. They're like, this doesn't mean it's not going to happen. I'm like, timing's everything. So thank you for that. Thank you for that. I would like to just also understand, besides that, I know that since US Bank is kind of driving this redevelopment, what other type of, I guess, not inhibitions, but what type of guardrails are up on this project too? Because there's a lot of retail on, France, it's kind of lower. It seems like you want that type of retail experience matching to the other side, as well as what US Bank is doing. Some of the comments that Mick brought up were, covering some of the retail with higher uses to just bring some more variety and I guess some more of the design guideline into this standpoint. So what type of guardrails do you guys see for this redevelopment with the uses that you're, I guess, promoting? And is there a potential for, a different use at this point, or is this kind of what you're focused on?
I think this is the, I don't know if Rich or US Bank to talk about the bank itself, but we feel like, they're in very urban, tight sites in Minneapolis and St. Paul that we've developed, that when you have a small block, you'll tend to do this where you put retail underneath the building. And in here, first of all, we think residents much prefer to live to the east side of the site, not right on top of France. And that in this case, we think the retail can survive and thrive better with its own patio seating and only spacing with essentially end cap retail spaces where you're not buried underneath an apartment building where you've seen a lot of vacancy. I know that the Byerly's building was mentioned, and it's been spotty in terms of the leasing there, in terms of retail. We think a more successful project that also allows more outdoor seating is this concept here in this way. And so we think, after looking at a lot of options here, that the highest and best use to execute on now is this. And a number of retailers we're talking to, we haven't committed to any yet, but we think it's more successful here than putting it below a building at this site, in this location.
Thanks. I think your answers to some of the questions allow me to better understand your bigger picture and see how we can work together as a city and a community to bring some good change. So I guess some of my bigger picture comments, I think Mick hit it well. I mean, this is a catalyst type of site. It's right on a very prominent corner, as you know, a very busy corner. So I think whatever is done here, I would also like to see more wow. I don't know what it is. I think I saw it in elements of the pictures that you tried to prescribe to like the public realm, but I don't see it in the aerial view. I don't see it in this view as much. So I think before we see you again, I don't know how to describe it more, but just convey that a little better. And I know we're in sketch plan, so we're not seeing it, but I don't necessarily see how this all integrates really well together. And I think Mick touches on it. There's a lot of gaps on the France side where, maybe US Bank could be turned the other way and have more street front, and maybe you could tuck more retail in over where there's asphalt currently. But just how do all sides of the building talk to each other as well as, face up to the public realm? And I think those were the pictures we really like to see, because that's where we'd picture walking the site and future occupants would be. So I think with other plans, like you mentioned, Estelle, it was just very apparent when you just looked at it, even from an aerial view, you could kind of see how the site flowed. And I'm not seeing that as easily here, so that'd be just one thing. I think the more easy it is to understand just from, a gut reaction, I think the project will be more appetizing to the neighbors as well as us when we come to make a decision. As it goes for the connections east, west, north, south, I think I can see the north-south one really good on the northern half, but then it kind of turns to pavement, on the southern portion, and then there's the parking integrated with kind of a wider street. Whatever you can do to move that street up more toward the 200 blocks, I think it makes it easier for the future development on the eastern side of this property too, to match up and provide them more flexibility with where that street goes. But big picture, I think you're moving in the right direction. I like the multi-use development here. There's retail, there's residential, there's public realm. But yeah, I'd encourage more green space and definitely the sidewalk along France, at least move the actual sidewalk portion closer to the building so there's more buffer from France. And I support the 50-foot setback, but I don't know what you have for, underground parking just adds a whole element of cost and expense, but it seems like you could have another 2 retail buildings kind of forming its own small mini block in that northwest quadrant. I don't know how you account for the lack of parking if it's not buried or somewhere else. I think Mick talks about having maybe some shared element on the northeast corner, but I think the more intensity you can bring to fill in the gaps would be nicer. And that's it, but thanks.
So about those bike racks. Okay, so you said yourself that this is a key property in the Southdale district. But when I look at this, I see something that's sort of very old-style suburban, especially the view from France. And that's kind of not what we're looking for, and that doesn't follow the guidelines. And it's, I think we tend to propagate mistakes, and so having, low density on the other side of the street, I think it's a huge mistake to propagate that onto this side of the street. So, sure, you want to have things look the same on both, but that leaves France Avenue feeling very much like a highway. And I think that's very much what we're trying to get away from with the Southdale guidelines. So anything that can be done, and I mean, sure, the building's, 1.5 times as tall or twice as tall as a typical one-story building, but it's not nearly enough. I mean, we need something much more substantial on France to make it feel like it's a comfortable place to be. Let's see. We also have potentially the E-line BRT coming to the area, and so it'll be slightly north of here. But again, that's going to bring more people on transit, and so the limitation of the street or even the limitation of parking won't be that big a deal because there are other ways of getting people in and around the Southdale district, and that's only going to change over time. So the thing is, we can't look at today, we have to look at the future. And I think the future for the whole area is much more dense with more transit. And so, this, especially the France-facing side, just is, I feel, completely wrong. Also, you have this sort of aborted north-south corridor and an east-west corridor that's, a sidewalk, basically, is what it looks like. I think the 7250 France project really kind of set a standard for what an internal Wooner sort of thing should look like in the Southdale district. Maybe not even as wide as theirs, but certainly, the kind of thought and design they put into that, I think, is something that every large parcel here deserves. In terms of being underparked, I don't care. I think cars are going to play a smaller role in the future, and certainly in this area compared to other parts of Edina. Parking need not be underground. If we want, you could do a ramp and you could face it on each side with something, whether it's retail or something else. And so parking would just be internal. This was discussed when they were talking before the Southdale Library was moving to Southdale. They were talking about these sort of ideas of having something facing the edges of a parking ramp. So it doesn't, if the water table's too high or whatever, there's other ways of doing that. I'm fine with the density and the maximum height of the apartments. They're probably the best use of the land. It's more the western side of it that I really, it's sort of like a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. It's kind of two completely different uses. or feels. It needs to be further back from France. I think that 50-foot setback is kind of set in stone. And again, the mistake on the other side of France doesn't mean, which was done kind of before the Southdale guidelines were finalized. We shouldn't repeat that mistake. And, the sidewalks need to be wide, if I'm not getting into too much detail. I think drive-throughs are a huge mistake when we've got, temperatures 15 degrees higher than normal. We're breathing air from forest fires out west, from Canada and from California. So much is happening in this world, and I think it's crazy to think that we can continue the way we have in the past. And I think any kind of drive-through is a mistake. I agree with Nick about the 300-foot wall on France. I think that's too big. I think it's important for any kind of connectivity on this site or any site in the area is that we want to build this kind of regular pattern of widths, or regular pattern of where the road, external and internal roads are. And so if you keep changing that, then it's going to be hard for adjacent parcels to connect correctly. Because again, all adjacent parcels are going to be redeveloped at some point, perhaps except across France. So I think regular spacing is really important, and I think Nick makes a really good point of that. And then finally, I think, I'm kind of torn about the entrances on France. I understand from a business case, it's sort of a chicken and egg thing where, the city, for good urbanism, we want the entrances off France. But until France is friendlier and more pedestrian friendly, it's hard to force companies to do that. On the other hand, I think there should be, while the entrances may not have to work, I think they should be designed to be entrances, and that they could be, at some point in the future when the whole area redevelops. It might be 10 or 20 years in the future, but hopefully the building will be around at least 30 years. Then it'll make more sense to use those entrances, but I think they should be designed in a way that they look like entrances and that they work as entrances, but they may not be used for the first 10 years or something. So, like a lot of projects we see, it's better than what's there. That's great. But I don't think that's enough, and I think it needs to be much better than what's there. And I think we have so much with climate change and young people not knowing what the future is going to be. I think we owe them a lot, and I think we need to design things really well. So, thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you to the applicant tonight. The fellow commissioners, I think there's been a lot of really good comments. I agree with many of what's said. But I'm just going to step back from the start. First of all, it's exciting to see Ryan, U.S. Bank, and RSP with this project. U.S. Bank started off tonight's presentation by discussing how they try to balance the interests of various members, various stakeholders, including their customers, their employees, their shareholders, their community. I think U.S. Bank does an outstanding job. I think it's just a great member. It's great to have a company like that in the Twin Cities. It's great to have a company like that in Edina, and it's a high quality business that we want to, we want to figure something out with. Ryan Companies, another great company, one of the best experiences in my career. Not long after I started shaving, was doing a deal with Pat Ryan and his team, and it was just so impressive how they worked. I mean, just a great experience. I still remember doing it. And RSP, obviously not quite as well known as U.S. Bank or Ryan, but a great company. I was at a 70th birthday party. For example, I was at a 70th birthday party recently, and one of the people just kept going on and on about what a great experience his son or daughter, I'm trying to be somewhat generic here, was having working at RSP and all the great things that RSP does. And I get stories like that from other architects too, about their high regard for RSP. So this is a great group of people to be working with on this site. So that's exciting. also, though, I will say that Mick Johnson is a great person to have worked with on design experience guidelines. I and Commissioner Olson worked with Mick Johnson on the design experience guidelines, and I thought it was very far-reaching. I think that Mick is a just brilliant and kind person, and I'm very proud of the design experience guidelines that turned up. So if there's one element of disappointment for me tonight, it's I must say that I haven't seen Mick have he's a gentle person when he communicates, but this was probably the strongest negative reaction I've seen him give to a project, which was kind of telling. It's not his style. And then when I look at the project, some of the drawings, for example, like I'm looking at page 31 of the packet that came to us. I have some questions too. I don't really see 4 quadrants. What the project looks like to me is one big development with some sidewalks running through it, and a couple of drive-throughs that you got to walk by. And I have an image of. I was in Surprise, Arizona several times a few years ago, and every time I went through the development parking lot, I always had to walk by the dumpster. And so that's just what comes to me when I see how this is laid out. I really would like to see something that is much more kind of a four unit grid. I recently have seen, back up. I think this is an improvement over the current state. But I think the design experience guidelines are a tremendous improvement over what we have. And I think, whereas I think 5 years ago that this would have been a nice project, I think 5 years from now we would feel bad that we didn't ask for something closer to design experience guidelines. I have seen drawings recently of things going on in other communities around the country, the projects that are being proposed, projects that are being developed, and they really do have a much more integrated look of here's where the housing is, here's where the activity properties are, here's where retail properties are, here's where other kinds of service properties are, here's a green space that kind of connects them. There might be a road through the perimeter, maybe a fountain in the center or something. And I think that is along the lines of what we're trying to see here. So I would like to see something that hews much more closely to what Mick had to say. I'm okay with increasing the FAR. I'm okay with increasing the parking or decreasing the parking volume. I do agree with Mick and Commissioner Miranda and a few others that something to hide the parking more instead of having the traditional suburban street surface level parking would be a big improvement. One thing I did want to comment on where I think this property is different than the properties across the street is that in a couple of factors. The properties across the street, first of all, were much closer to residential, and as Ryan knows as well as anyone else up here, the proximity to residential created unique issues for developments on that side of the street. And the other thing is some of those, like the vitamin shop space, the size of the lots were bigger challenges unique to that site. With that, let's see. Those are my general comments. A couple of questions. I don't know if we asked parking. Have you looked at whether parking could be done underground?
First of all, is underground for the apartment, the residential building. The retail,
it's harder.
It's if you looked at Centennial Lakes retail underneath the top level parking, that retail is vacant for a reason because it's just people in Edina, this part of Edina at least, want to park on convenience parking that's outside, and so this is we thought was a good move in terms of screening that parking as much as we could at these buildings along France versus pushing it back like it was originally on buildings like this. Convenience parking is needed today. We're not going to be successful signing leases or having retailers survive here without convenience parking.
Fair enough. And then my final question, I guess I had to, you gave a good explanation as to why you wanted to do a single-use building for the multifamily instead of a mixed-use building. Without delving too far into uses, though, will the first floor be apartments then, or what kind of, how did, because a lot of times people don't like first floor apartments.
We agree. The first floor concept we have right now is along 70th. It's glassy. Front lobby, fitness room, amenities. Along, and Josh, maybe you can explain further, but we want people when they arrive to that motor court drop-off on the roundabout to have, of course, visibility right into the action happening inside there. So when you're at Galleria looking across 70th, it's life inside there. It's not opaque. If you can explain further.
Yeah, we are looking at, so the lobby would be on the corner here, and then it would be active use part of the residential experience, so common spaces, fitness rooms, so things like that, but it would be active use that is not residential units along 70th. And then we are looking at a few along that north-south connection, a few ground floor units potentially, but just a few kind of close to 70th. But the rest of it would be kind of active use.
I think that sounds nice, and that's not. I mean, it's great to be working. It's great to have you guys here, and I'd really like to see it come back with something that's much closer to Mick. I'm sure you guys can come up with something really nice. What a talented trio of organizations to be involved with this project.
There's been a lot of great feedback, and it's some of it we will definitely work on. Some of it is going to be very challenging to adhere exactly to Mick, but we'll take a look and work at it for sure.
Thank you for listening. Thank you.
Well, just to follow up, a lot of the comments, I really agree with a lot of the comments. And the major one, again, is just this is a really critical, important corner, and it's kind of underwhelming what we see. And so just for some specifics, the 50-foot setback, I want to see that when you come back. And, again, as Lou mentioned and others have, we don't want you to match what's there. That's the whole purpose why we went through the Greater Southdale Area Plan. And one of the frustrations for us was we didn't have anything in place to really say this is what we want. So we would end up with kind of the, single floor, two-story, individual, just on its own sites. And so that's exactly what we're trying to get away from. So definitely want you to apply that 50-foot setback. I still agree. I like seeing the openings and the access to France. I think that's keeps it. That's one of the components that's going to make that a better street. And so, I'd like to see that because again, we see structures built there that look like they have a door but they're locked. So bring that activity, not just center, but bring it to the street. Definitely I want to see more density in the height. I agree with what Mick said to try to combine it and have more of the open space, public space. This is just separate lots that have been developed individually. You've got this incredible opportunity with a large site just to do a great one. So make it look like it's one whole site, cohesive within, and then also how it works and connects to the surrounding areas. Agree with the surface parking. I have no problem with reducing the parking below what's required, and I don't like seeing all that surface parking. Definitely want to see stronger east-west, north-south connection that's not roads, more the pedestrian, more the bike, more of those Woonerifs. And I loved your point, Lou, about the drive-through. That's a great point. We should get away from those. And so that's it. So I just, I want you to come back. I do want to see you come back. But I do want to see it just really thought out as one whole site working together, and how it really, again, just feeds into and really starts this transition that we want to see in Greater Southdale. So thank you. Anyone else have any other final? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the feedback.
Some petitions, I'm going to just kind of skip over that. Do we have any chair and member comments? Go ahead, Jimmy.
I sent an email, I guess, to everyone just about checking out that master plan. I don't know if anyone got a chance to look at that at all. And maybe that's what's made it tough to just look at any project after reading through what they envisioned for that waterfront project. But I think it's just a reminder that I think it's okay to expect bold, creative things, because it is doable. And maybe that should have been more of my message tonight too. But you look at what that company is doing to reinvent the public realm, transportation, and just an area. And I think it just hits close to home on a lot of levels for me, just personally, as well as sitting here and what I do professionally. But it's like, man, if that developed the way it did, wouldn't you want to go visit that at least? And can we get more of that here? And I feel like we have pieces like Centennial Lakes. I mean, what that was as a development was truly innovative. And I think we're not holding people to that standard anymore or expecting it. And the city does have a part in that. And like Centennial Lakes was a public-private partnership. So I think some of it spills to the grand view. We have a public piece in the middle of a commercial node. I think we should drive home more innovation for what that could be. And that's just my thoughts in general. But if you got a chance to look through that, it's really inspiring, at least to me. I just wanted to hear what other people thought about it.
No, I agree. I think what it brings to mind is the potential for that Hennepin County Library site, because that's the equivalent of really 4 large square blocks, and it'll be empty. And it seems like that might be a really good space to do something innovative that's really planned in a public-private partnership that can be really stellar if it's done right. Ta-da.
So I'm a huge fan of technology, but I may surprise you by saying that I'm not a fan of that Toronto project at all. And the main reason is privacy is a huge thing. And, there's a hashtag on Twitter where they call it surveillance capitalism, which is really Google's, modus operandi. I mean, that's their business model, is to harvest information from people. Right? So everything's free, right? But you're giving up all this information. And we're seeing it, with federal investigation of Facebook and Google and YouTube and, all these platforms have, and these business models have huge implications on politics, on society, on privacy. And so just going gung-ho on all that sort of stuff, I think, is a mistake. And I think, while I love technology and what it can do, I think we really need to be very careful about how we do this. And I think there's a building pushback on the way Google, among other companies, does that sort of thing. So that's my main concern. I mean, I love the technology. I love, the whiz-bang of it and everything. But I do have real concerns about privacy and such. So.
And I think I know that one. It's a whole other topic. I think what was just cool about it too is that aside, they thought out of the box with a lot of basic things that I think we're just so accustomed to. This is the way it's got to be, and like the way they try to finance different projects or make it affordable, like 40% of it's all affordable. And I think it just is, it's flipping paradigms like on its end, just to rethink of the way in which we could develop a piece of land and integrate it with people. I like the sensor thing just from the ones that don't survey people, but take, the elements and then out comes, like an umbrella that covers a sidewalk when it's raining type of stuff. There's technology that doesn't harm, but I think they pulled back a lot on it, but I think it's just it was cool to see how you could present something pretty complicated. And I think we have a lot of great opportunity in our city, and we have great partners like who are just sitting in front of us. And we're not seeing that type of creativity and innovation and bold steps forward. It's just, we got to get our leases, we got to make money. And I think if we own a part of the project, and like the Grandview spot, the Southview, I think there's a few ones in these commercial nodes, like we really should consider putting crazy pressure on city leaders to rethink the way that could develop, kind of toward that end. But thanks for letting me send that to you guys and stir some thoughts.
Do you have anything? Nothing's going on? What?
We'll be busy in the upcoming months. I'll just leave it at that.
That's summer.
Nothing that's, no applications that have been made, but there's a few things that may come to. The one thing I will mention is, we've talked about the work session that we have with the city attorney. Mm-hmm. Still working on that. It's probably going to be August-ish. Mm-hmm.
Just one last thing. I mentioned the Grandview site because Frauenschuh, I guess, was back and proposed something again in front of the HRA last week. So I think, are there other things the city with its land or that you know of besides that one?
Yeah, and I don't think you'll be seeing that one either. Yeah, the council's going to kind of wait and see how the housing, that task force, kind of in a holding pattern, at least probably for the rest of this year with Grandview site.
Any update or conversation around community parking, particularly at 44th and France?
So we're putting together the budget cycle and the CIP for the next 2 years, and it's in there. So the council will be having that discussion. It will be in front of them.
Okay.
That and the larger Cahill industrial study. So for community development, we don't have a lot of things, but we've got 2 pretty big ones in there this go around.
All right, that's good. Do we have the work plan coming up, or did we already? Is that coming up where we have to list what we want?
Yes, so we'll need to start thinking about that. I think it's usually September time, so we'll have to start thinking about it. September, October, I think we need to submit.
All right, cool. And so as we mention things that we would like to include in that, are you writing that stuff down? Are we supposed to keep remembering? Or like just tonight was mentioned stormwater management plan, floor-to-floor ceiling height.
Yeah, so the stormwater it's on our plan.
Uh-huh.
But we'll put that on a future agenda and we can brainstorm.
Okay. Thank you. All right, well then, is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
You get to second. Oh yeah, well you get to second.
I take that back. No, I already revoked my motion, so it's up.
I move to adjourn.
Great, is there a second? Is a second. All in favor? Aye. Meeting adjourned. Thank you.